It's time for the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast.
We've got lots and lots of things to talk about and to do today. Covering the territories from the 1940s to the 1990s.
It's the best thing going today.
Interviewing wrestlers, referees, authors, and other media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great.
The cream, yeah. The cream of the crop.
And now, here's your host, Tony Richards.
Well, ho, 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 everybody. Welcome to the Christmas Super Show here at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. Greetings, holiday greetings, and salutations to all of your family and friends from all of us here at the Richards Ranch and the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. Man, what a super show that we have lined up. I've been thinking about this show all year long. From the very beginning of the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast, I've looked ahead to what was going to be going on at the end of this year. And then we'd be coming to the culmination of all of our shows about 1975, 50 years ago in pro wrestling history. And I've been thinking and planning this show for months, and it has come together beautifully. I hope you enjoy it. It is going to be a pretty long show, but I have four outstanding guests here at the Richards Ranch to talk to you about some things, and I'll get to that in just a second. Let's get the promotional items out of the way because there's a lot going on. First thing I want to tell you is we're up to show number 6 on the Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw podcast that I am guest on. And we've been talking about the Roy Welch family legacy now, and we're up to episode number 6. And on that show, which is coming out the same time this one is going to be coming, I think this show will be out on Christmas Eve, and Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw will be out on Christmas Day. And Les Thatcher is going to be there as a special guest on the show. And Les came into the Tennessee Territory in 1968. About the time that Roy Welch and Jerry Jarrett were taking car rides together. Jerry was wrestling a little bit, and he was refereeing in Memphis, and Roy was slowly but surely turning the booking over to Jerry Jarrett in Memphis. And then when he did that, 3 of the top baby faces left the territory: Les Thatcher, Dennis Hall, and Ken Lucas. And so we're going to talk to Les Thatcher about all of that was going on in the Tennessee Territory at the time. And then we're going to work our way through in that Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw show and culminate at the end with the Mario Galento incident, the famous incident where Mario Galento attacked Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler in the ring live on Memphis television. And I've got a little bit different spin on that story that I think is worth considering that ties back to Roy Welch. So that's on Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw. Here on the Time Tunnel, you can download the audio version of our podcast now on all the major platforms. We have several of our archived shows from this year there. We're constantly adding new ones from the library from this particular year. You can do our podcast on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, on Podcast Addict, Pocket Cast, and all the others. You can still see all of our shows on our Substack channel, both the audio and video versions. And we have all the video versions plus clips of our show on our YouTube channel, the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. And so just real quick, I've also been doing here at the year end, I've been doing year reviews of the major years in pro wrestling territory history on the 5s. So this is 2025. So I've gone back to 1925 on the Evolution of Wrestling series that I write. And I completely analyzed and put out how the territories were foundationally forming in 1925 and the things that were happening that were leading to that. Also, I have 1935 out, and just yesterday I sent out 1945. So still to come, I have 1955, 1965, 1975, and 1985 still to come on the Evolution of Wrestling series that I'm writing at Substack. And that is for our premium investors, our people who have invested their money in for a subscription and to support me as a pro wrestling historian and the work that I'm doing. It's easy to do. It's $5 a month or $50 a year if you want to save $10 on an annual subscription. I'm also doing a salute to Territory Era television wrestling show commentators and announcers, and that's going out to all our free subscribers. And there's 31 of those, and we just are releasing number 7 this week. And so we'll be doing that even on through the end of the year and on into 2026. And plus, we have our flagship free subscription article, the Daily Chronicle that I put out, the Pro Wrestling History newsletter that is based on that day in pro wrestling history, where we run down a lot of things. And I've started writing some articles on the life and career of several of the Territory Era stars, and that has gotten good reviews and a lot of support. So now we got all that out of the way. Let's get to our first guest. We have 4 big guests on the show today, and the first one is Steve Gennerelli. And in the show today, we're going to talk about all the world champions in 1975. We're going to talk about Bruno Sammartino, and that's what Steve is here to talk about. We're going to talk about Verne Gagne, who dropped the AWA title to Nick Bockwinkel in February of 1975. George Schire will be here, always a good time to talk about that. Then Jerry Oates will be here as a guest. When Terry Funk won the NWA World title from Jack Briscoe on December 10th, 1975 in Miami Beach at the Convention Center, Terry Funk got on a plane and he went to Kansas City. And his first opponent in Kansas City the night he was first NWA champion was Jerry Oates. And Jerry's going to talk about that night that he wrestled Terry Funk for the NWA title. And finally, to cap everything off, Jerry Briscoe, my dear personal friend, will be here. We're going to talk about Jack Briscoe's NWA World title reign from 1973 to 1975, and also the circumstances around him dropping the title to Terry. So that'll be coming up here in our show. So it's a big Christmas super show, y'all, and I'm excited about it. Let's get it underway. Let's start with our first guest here to talk about the WWWF, 3 W's, F, world champion, which he was only called the WWWF champion at this time, Bruno Sammartino. My good and dear personal friend, Steve Gennerelli, is here. Let's go to that conversation right now. Well, the Christmas Super Show here at Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel is well underway, and I've invited on our WWWF analyst and commentator, Steve Gennerelli, to join us here during the happy holiday season. Merry Christmas, Steve.
It's great to be here with you, Tony. Christmas is one of my favorite times of the year, and it's great to look back on 1975 one final time before we get to 1976.
Yeah, on the Christmas Super Show, I thought I've had 3 of our most trusted guests on to talk about the World Championships that were, and we're not talking about all of them because Mil Mascaras had a world title. Giant Baba had the PWF title in All Japan, and Antonio Inoki had the NWF championship for a while. So did Tiger Jeet Singh. So we're not talking about those. We do recognize them, but we're going to stick with the ones that we saw in the magazines the most here in North America. And of course, Bruno Sammartino had a fantastic 1975, and that's what I've invited Steve on to talk about today. So, Steve, I'm ready to go when you are.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk about Bruno, my all-time favorite wrestler. And I went back and did research, and I looked at 1975, and I was curious to know, like, who were his most frequent opponents. I mean, you and I have reviewed most of this year, if not all of this year, and we talked about most of these folks, so it's going to be no surprise. But his most frequent opponent was Spiros Arion, who he wrestled 24 times. Now, as anyone listening to this probably knows, you have to buy into these numbers. There's got to be a margin of error there, but at least we have 24 recorded times of him against Spiros Arion. His number 2 opponent was Bobby Duncombe, who he really had started feuding with at the end of the prior year in 74. I have him listed as wrestling Duncombe 18 times. Number three was Waldo von Erich, a bit of a drop off in numbers, only 9 times. And then the final two to round out the top five, George Steele and Blackjack Lanza, more of a tag team guy. They both wrestled Bruno 6 times each in 1975. And I would say was a very important year for the Worldwide Wrestling Federation and also for Bruno as well, because this was probably the first year that they started to sell out not only the Garden but the Felt Forum of Madison Square Garden, the theater that is in next to the building, and would draw another 4,000 fans, and it really. Bruno had a first reign, and now he's back. This was really year or two of his second reign, and he really kind of reestablished himself and was definitely a box office force in the pro wrestling and definitely in the Northeast.
Yes, and if I'm thinking right, I think he went on a tour of Australia and found Bobby Duncombe.
That's right. I heard that too.
And came back and suggested him as someone he could work with on top. And obviously that Bruno had an eye for that. I mean, he could see people that he could see himself working with. And I've also just recently confronted my own bias with Bruno Sammartino, because
Really?
I think I think putting the focus on these years that we put on him this year, and I watched a lot of tape and all to get more familiar with what we're discussing that's available.
Sure.
One thing that I noticed that I just never noticed before, I think I had it in my mind that Bruno was more of a brawler,
Mm-hmm.
and that his main strength was to go out there and basically have a fight.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, one thing I discovered as I watched different matches with different type opponents, he was really good at adjusting. He adjusted to his opponent really, really well. He wrestled Spiros a little bit more,
Right.
where a George Animal Steel was just a fight. It was just
Right.
a
That's right.
brawl. And I never really gave him credit for that flexibility before. And
I think that's a great point on your part. I know, in his retirement years, people like when he started doing shoot interviews, that was one of the things he said about himself, is that he tried to adjust his performance to the opponent rather than have the opponent work his style. So he felt in that way he'd always remain fresh and wouldn't be, so repetitive like so many wrestlers are. Um, I, I gotta not just make this all about Bruno. I mean, Jack Briscoe's performance in 1975, as I'm sure you have had other people on to discuss it, was just a remarkable year for Jack Briscoe. And I have his numbers right here. I'll just briefly talk about that because I want to give him credit too. His top opponents were Dory Funk Jr. 13 times, Bob Roop, one of the top legitimate wrestlers of that era, 10 times, Terry Funk 9 times, Wahoo McDaniel 7 times, Harley Race, Ron Fuller, and Mongolian Stomper 6 times each. So that's just an amazing variety of opponents for Jack Briscoe. I mean, I guess if you were to ask me, like, what were the differences between these promotions? Bruno is mainly wrestling on the East Coast, and he's wrestling a number of opponents repetitively. But Jack Briscoe is going to all the different territories and even going to places outside of the U.S. And wrestling just a variety of opponents. I have a paper in front of me here with all the opponents listed, and I would say it's got to be about 40 some odd different opponents he faced this year. Bruno's total opponents, I would say, maybe about 15 different opponents for the most part. They did have a couple in common. Bruno wrestled Stan Stasiak a couple of times. Jack Briscoe wrestled him, I think, just once. Jack Briscoe also wrestled Spiros Arion on a show. It's quite interesting to know that. Um, but
Would that have been in Australia?
that could have been that could have been, and it's interesting going back to your show, Tony. I think you had Mike George on the show recently,
Hmm.
and he did talk about wrestling in Japan. And at the time, I don't think he can remember Bruno's name, but he said that guy from New York who was on top for a long time.
Yeah.
They teamed up together, and I think. Bruno may have done a job for Obama, or maybe it was Mike George that did, but it's interesting that those two got paired up together.
Yeah, and just to give Mike a little slack, he really didn't talk about wrestling much with anybody, in the
Mhm.
last several years. So
Sure.
I came around and started prompting him on things that he, kind of, he's not like us, we're like doing
Right.
it every day.
Sure.
The thing I would say about Jack too is his most frequent opponents, Dory Funk was first, right? Dory
That's
Funk
right.
Jr.
13.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so he would have wrestled him both in Texas and in Florida.
Right.
Bob Roop would have been a Florida only.
Okay.
Harley would have been Florida because
Mhm.
Harley was booking Florida in most of 75. Who was the four?
Wahoo.
Wahoo would have been Charlotte. So
Okay.
Wahoo was in the Carolinas. So that would have been in the Carolinas. And five was Fuller.
Yeah, Fuller is tied with Race, and Stomper is also in there too.
Okay, Stomper would have been in Florida.
Mhm.
Fuller would have been in Tennessee, and Ron only worked Memphis and Louisville. The rest of the week he worked in
Interesting.
his Knoxville territory, and he might have wrestled Jack in his Knoxville territory, but I know he wrestled a series in Memphis of I think 3 times, maybe 4, where they did a match. It went to a time limit draw. They came back the next time, did a no DQ. They came back the next time. So most of the time that was in Tennessee, either on one side or the other of the state. So
But
his most frequent opponents were in pretty concentrated areas, I guess is what I'm saying. The guys that
yeah,
wrestled him a few times were the territories like Vancouver and
right. Portland, places like
Calgary
that.
and
Mhm.
places he maybe went twice a year.
Right. Right.
Because and I think, and I'm going to ask Jerry this question, but I think um, Jack was getting worn down in that last year that he had the belt of everything, and he lived in Florida. So I think they were trying to keep him in Florida as much as they possibly could without shortchanging the other promoters.
Oh yeah, and I will say that the WWF, even though that's my home promotion and my favorite promotion, it was more formulaic as far as the scenarios. Bruno is the hero, babyface going up against a different group of heels. This was the 1975 group, but I got to give Jack Briscoe credit because when you look at all of his opponents, including the ones we just mentioned, you have baby faces in there, you have heels in there, and that wouldn't have worked in the WWF. They didn't want to see Bruno defend the belt against Chief Jay Strongbow. You know, I mean, there may have been a small minority that would have been clamoring for that, but Mr. McMahon, Vince's father, definitely made it clear that he didn't believe in scientific matches. He wanted to see good versus evil, and he felt that's what the fans really wanted to see.
I'll give you just something I think is kind of funny. But in 1986, during the national expansion, after Flair had pretty much become a company champion,
Sure.
I think 85 was the last year he kind of toured. I don't think he toured as much in 86. I think he mostly did Crockett in 86. But when the and this is the difference between an older type fan and a brand new fan in 1986.
Okay.
Great American Bash 1986. Ric Flair is going to defend his title 13 times in the month of July against somebody different every night. And this was supposed to be a big angle. And I
Right.
thought, doesn't the NWA champion face somebody different every night all year long? Like, why
Right.
is that such a big deal?
Yeah.
But it
But
got
you're
over.
right.
It got over with people who, in 1985 and 1986, there were a lot of new people discovering wrestling,
Right,
And
that's
they
true.
didn't know the difference. They thought, oh my gosh, he's going to wrestle Road Warrior Animal tonight, and he's going to wrestle Magnum TA tomorrow night, and Ricky Morton
Mhm.
the night after that, and Robert Gibson the night after that. And I'm like, that's been going on since 1948, you know. But
Right,
but
right.
uh, newer fans, they loved it, and they sure sold a lot of tickets in 1986. So who am I?
No, no, it's really that's really interesting what you just said. I mean, what was the norm? Just we're talking about 75, and it's definitely the norm. He's wrestling a different person every night, with exception here and there. But yeah, that's definitely kind of the downfall of that whole national expansion thing. I mean, from a fan perspective, I mean, you'd rather see the variety and the not just the same feud like WWF did with, say, Hogan's on the road. He's on the road. He's married to this opponent for 3 months, and then he's going to be married to another opponent for 4 months, and
Right.
it just got old and predictable. And but that was the national thing, I guess. So
And Bruno had, and I've talked to Herb Simmons. We talked about it a little bit on my show when we talked about St. Louis in 1975, where Bruno
sure,
didn't draw well. So he had a little bit of a negative connotation there. Like, well, of course he draws well in the WWWF, but in the other towns he wouldn't have gotten over because just look at St. Louis, he didn't draw well. But I will say this. I probably had a little bit of that bias, but this year, and looking at all his matches that I could look at that were on video, one thing I did not give Bruno credit for, along with him having the flexibility, was he made his guys look good.
yes, yeah,
Uh,
he was
he
always good at
he
selling.
he was the overpowering hero baby face, but
Mhm.
he knew when to make the comeback, and he knew
Mhm.
when to turn it on and come back and have the crowd in the palm of his hand and win the match, because you were pretty well convinced, or else people wouldn't be coming back to buy tickets, that, oh no, this is going to be the time where this person is going to get Bruno. And that
Oh
takes
yeah.
a lot of skill, a lot of skill.
Yeah, yeah, he was a master storyteller in that regard, and I think I'm sure you know the famous story. There was a time in the early '70s in the NWA where there was some friction at the top about who was going to be the title holder, and I think it was coming down between Jack Briscoe, Harley Race, Dory Jr.,
Hmm.
and it was a time that I think this was after Bruno's first reign, and Sam Mushnick had Bruno come in, and he really liked Bruno as a sportsman type, like the sports theme of St. Louis. He'd come in wearing a suit. He could talk to the media. He was presentable, and I think he was. I think Mushnick briefly was flaunting Bruno, like, "Hey, you guys, if you don't want to operate." If you don't want to be an NWA champion in the mold I want you to be in, I could take Bruno from New York and put him in this role.
Right, because New York had come back to the NWA.
That's right.
They were an NWA member, and there for a few years, I think 75 is one of those years, where they're just calling him the WWF champion. They
Right.
aren't calling him the world champion, because
That's right.
to be an NWA member, you have to relinquish that
That's
recognition.
right.
And yeah, and Sam was doing that. He was
Mhm.
saying, "Hey, they're a member. I could always put the belt on Bruno, and he could just be the champion." And
Sure.
um, that was sort of his keep guys in line type strategy. But I agree with you. I have gained a lot more respect for Bruno because of, and I got to tip my hat to Thez, because he's the one that started all that. He's the one that
Right.
started being a professional as the world champion. And Bruno
Right.
and Jack did a good job of that. You see a lot of pictures of Jack being interviewed in a suit and
Right.
looking like what the world champion should look like.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
Bruno did that also. He
Yeah.
was a he was a businessman.
Oh, absolutely. And then that's what wrestling needed. I mean, people sneered at wrestling. They laughed at wrestling. Here's you can count them on one hand, but you have a Bruno, a Jack Briscoe, a Dory Jr. These are people you can be prideful of and respectful of. They're athletes and highly skilled, just like top race car drivers or top baseball players or football players, and Sam Mushnick could appreciate that. Maybe some of the other promoters didn't put much stock into that, but he certainly did.
Well, he proved that your audience will reflect back to you what you give them.
Right.
So if you're in the ring and around the wrestling business and on your television show and in your interviews and whenever you present yourself, whatever forum it is, if you present yourself with a disrespect or with a lower level than what you should feel like you should have, that's what the audience is going to get back to you.
Right.
If
That's very interesting.
If you disrespect the business, they're going to be disrespectful because that's where you're leading them, right? That's what
Right.
they see in you. And that's
right.
what Sam didn't like gimmicks, and he wouldn't let Von Raschke be Baron Von Raschke. And he didn't book Dusty a lot because he thought Dusty was more gimmick than wrestler.
Right.
So I can see where the Madison Square Garden audiences and the Baltimore audiences and the Philadelphia and the Boston audiences, when it was the main event, they were rowdy and they were rooting for Bruno, but they weren't disrespectful.
Right. Right. Well, like you said earlier, 1975 was remarkable, both for all the federations, really. I mean, we didn't talk about AWA, but they went through a transformation at the end of the year with Nick winning the title from Verne, and but I just wanted to say, because I know we're not going to be talking for a lot tonight, but 1976 gets to be even more interesting, in my opinion, as far as what happened in the WWF, 3WF. Uh, this is the year that Bruno gets injured by Stan Hansen in a match, and as we end 1975, superstar Billy Graham has had one match with Bruno right at the end of the year or close to the end of the year, and he's going to become one of the major challengers of 76, along with Ivan Koloff, Ernie Ladd, a little bit more of Arion, Bugsy McGraw still around. And then when the Hanson thing happens, he goes on the shelf for about 2 months, and then he comes back. He does wrestle Hanson a bit, but then he's wrestling Brody and Patera and Von Raschke and Stasiak. It's really an interesting year, and I really look forward to reviewing that with you, Tony. That's going to be a lot of fun.
You bet. And I will say this to your point. I feel like all those positive attributes we said about Briscoe and Sammartino could go for Bockwinkel as well. I mean, I think
Bockwinkel. Oh my God, what a champion he was!
I thought he presented himself in all of those great positive attributes that we mentioned. Verne, and I'm going to talk to George about this on the show. Verne held the belt from 1968 to 1975. I mean, that was a long time, and there were some years where he didn't really wrestle that much. He picked up his frequency a little bit heading into the Bockwinkel title change, but I don't know. I want to hear George's perspective on that. When you look at the top people that Bruno worked with in '75, what's your favorite?
I guess I would have to say Arion. He just seemed kind of like Bruno's evil twin brother. They were very similar, both ethnic, both European. But Bruno was the good guy you could trust in, and Arion all of a sudden was this devious, mischievous guy with Lassie by his side, and he just looked like he was ready to kill somebody. And he did a number on a lot of the enhancement guys and some of the lower level guys like your Kevin Sullivans and people like that. And yeah, it's a very memorable feud. I know that. I mean, there's not a lot of us Bruno fans still around. It's been over 50 years now, um, but for those of us that are still here, that Arion feud does get talked about a lot. So that's probably the most memorable one of this year, with Koloff probably in second place, because I know a lot of the fans are fearful that Bruno might lose the title to Koloff, just like he had a few years earlier.
How many times did he wrestle Koloff again?
This year, I have only down for 4 and 75. I know they
I think that's about right.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot. They do pick it up in 76. And as the top heels at the time would say, when the Hansen injury happened, it really did a number on the paydays for Koloff, Graham, and Ernie Ladd, because they were supposed to wrestle Bruno around the Horn in those other big cities like the Baltimores and Landover, Maryland, and Providence, Rhode Island. And a lot of those shows had to get canceled or rescheduled in some way. So a lot of those guys pretty much left the territory and wouldn't come back until the Backlund era. So
Trying to put myself in McMahon, Vince Sr. and Gorilla Monsoon's head, I think I think they were smart in that after the title change between Koloff and Bruno, they only brought him back 3 or 4 times a year. Like he would
right,
only come back just a few times to make it hot and fiery, and then they moved on to somebody else. Like,
that's right.
but it created this great heat and drama, like you said, of people going, "Oh my gosh, it's Ivan Koloff. He beat Bruno before, or this could happen
Right,
again." And just about the time you think it is going to happen, then he's wrestling somebody else.
right.
It's a great example of really good booking of having callbacks to something else, but also having something new and having something fresh and knowing when to move on. And that's a really a great example there. Let me ask you this question, and I'll preface the question by saying I love Freddie Blassie. I love him as a heel. I loved his LA stuff. I loved his Georgia stuff. I'm this week on the Briscoe and Bradshaw show. I was just talking about his run in the Gulf Coast, where he wrestled Buddy Fuller and Lee Fields and people like that. But let me ask you this: did Spiros Aragon need Freddie Blassie?
That's a great question. He did it only from the sense of the New York fans were used to that formula of every heel has a manager. It's kind of like superstar Billy Graham on some of his shoot interviews. He said, like, I don't know why they gave me the Grand Wizard. I could do an interview. Yeah, he could, and he didn't really need a manager, but Grand Wizard did accentuate and he enhanced Billy Graham, the way he would like struggle to pull his shirt off. And, they kind of hinted at some kind of a, relationship between Billy and the Wizard. And, and that all added to the package. And Arion had been a beloved good guy for a long time, but now he was with this hated, venomous manager, this Fred Blassie, who everybody hated, and he wore audacious clothes, and he had a cane, and he jabbed the enhancement guys with his cane. And so it just added more heat to and Blassie added to the package that was Arion, I guess.
I I totally see that. At the same time, when the match is going on, for what you become accustomed to managers doing while the match is
Right.
going on, they don't really do. I mean, they're not that active, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
And
and this is
Spiros
one thing.
was that guy who could do an interview, so
Well, this is one thing you may not be aware of, Tony. Like in New York, the managers, they would come out, they would get introduced with their charge, but they had to immediately go back to the dressing room.
mm,
In those days, they had to just go back because that was the state athletic commission rules. I know that loosened up around the time of the national expansion. And then
yeah,
then everything got really loose, and they a lot of outside interference and lots of nonsense. But yeah, in those early days, they just couldn't have that happen, I guess.
right, right. Well, it was a fantastic year. Do you think Bruno's second reign was better than his first?
I've talked to a buddy of mine who I met, and another wrestling guy, and he told me that you couldn't even compare second reign Bruno to the first. I mean, he lived through those '60s, and he saw the Bill Watts, he saw the Gene Kiniski and the Sheik and Monsoon, and all the other opponents. He wasn't denigrating Bruno's opponents. He just felt like it was different. I mean, Bruno had lost a lot of weight. Like he was much more speedier and aerodynamic. He was much more bulky and power lifter looking in the first reign. And I know I prefer the second reign because I can see the matches easier. They're in color. There's very little of the first reign other than the match with Baba in Japan and maybe a smidge of one with Bulldog Brower. But I just like what I'm familiar with, but it would have been nice to have been able to see those older matches as well.
Yeah. Um, I just love we have what we have
Yes.
to look at, and
Yeah.
I I with the advantage, and I think this is true, and this is what I feel is a shame, is that if more people could see more of the old guys, they would appreciate them more.
That's right.
Because as I watched more Bruno than I probably have ever watched in my life in the last year, as we've been doing this show, I gained a lot more appreciation for him.
Yeah,
I,
yeah, he was really no frills. I mean, he didn't wear knee pads. He didn't wear, tape on his wrists. He just had the boots. He had uh, his tights on. He had no other frills, no jacket, no robe, anything. And I think that's why people loved him so much. He was just believable. Just I mean, he would just get in the center of the ring. He would tie up with his opponent, and after that, it was anything could happen. Could be a melee, it could be a match, it could be whatever. But the fans were just so into it and so anticipating what was about to happen. Those were very interesting days.
you might, because you have seen probably all of his shoot interviews, and I've seen hardly any.
Okay,
But he's got such a symbiotic relationship with the crowd. I mean,
right.
every move he makes, it causes the crowd to do something.
Right.
And so my question to you is, has he ever talked about who called the match?
Um,
Did he call the match or did the heel call the match? Because the way he's got a relationship with the crowd, it's almost like he's probably calling it because
yeah. Yeah,
uh, the,
honestly, he did open up a little bit, but he wasn't at the Ed Farhat level of keeping kayfabe, but he never talked about that kind of a thing like, well, I
uh,
call it or the heel called it. But you make a good point. I mean, he 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 was his own talent scout. He pretty much picked his own opponents. Um, he may have carried the match or called the match. That part I really don't know, honestly.
I know with Jack in the NWA, he had a varying degree of opponents' skill level.
Right.
And if they couldn't basically go with him, which very few people could, but if they couldn't go with him, he'd take over and start calling the match,
Yeah.
and he would, wrap it up or do whatever he wanted to do with the match because he just lost confidence in them. I was just kind of curious because his matches are so, for the style that he worked, his matches are so beautiful. I mean, they
Yeah.
and the crowd makes the match. I mean, the crowd's with him and supportive, and they react to everything the heel does. They react to everything Bruno does, and I just kind of thought, well, he's probably, to use the word in a productive way and not a negative connotation. He's the manipulator here. But I don't know. I was just curious.
No, no, yeah, he never really came that clean on that, but I think I think it was much more intelligent than people ever gave him credit for. I mean, he really could read the room or read the arena and know what they wanted, and just I think he inertly wanted to make the fans happy and satisfied with the product that he put out there. He was never one to like try to chip them or shortchange the fans. I think he always wanted to make sure they got their money's worth.
And I just think in St. Louis, he didn't have time to make the connection. Like he wasn't
Right.
on the TV all the time. He was a special appearance, and there was not that same connection that he had with the East Coast fans wasn't there,
Right.
right?
Well. There was a story on I know on Brian Last show, the 605 Super Podcast. He had this one fellow on who's since passed away, but he said that during that brief period where Bruno did go to St. Louis, and this is when he was going to wrestle Harley at 72, in between his WWF reigns. Um, I think Bruno had a match against somebody, and it didn't really go over, and so they were going to have this big match with him against Harley and I think somebody talked to him or said, this is what you have to do in St. Louis. You have to work a different style. And he did do more holds and did more methodical things. And they ended up having an hour draw. So it had to be, a lot more into the match than just your regular 10, 15-minute Bruno style match. And they made it happen. They made it work. I mean, there's been people that said like Bruno was like sucking sweat off a Harley just to keep going, but they got through the match. And the guy that gave the story or told the story on the 605 show, he said it was, in his opinion, the greatest match he'd ever seen. And he'd been to St. Louis for many title matches. So, I mean, I think just seeing Bruno Sammartino, famous from the magazines, from New York, against I was going to say Jack Briscoe, against Harley Race in St. Louis, that must have been a thrill for anybody.
Yeah, and Sam was going for that thing in St. Louis that Vince went for in Madison Square Garden too, where you didn't always know who was going to be on the card. It was a constant revolving door of performers. It wasn't the same guys all the time. So
That's right.
That worked, but I'm glad you told that story because that just adds to my admiration, because when a guy says that he's a veteran of St. Louis and that was the best match he ever saw, that carries some weight for me.
Yeah, and I'll find that episode of 605. I'll even send that to you so you can listen to it. This is very, very interesting. I know I've listened to it a few times.
Well, thanks, Steve, for running down the 75 one last time here at the end of the year, talking about Bruno's most wrestled opponents and your favorites. I know our audience values your opinion and your input quite a bit, so I thank you for coming on and doing that. And I want to wish
it's been a pleasure.
I want to wish you and Erica a Merry Christmas and Happy Holiday Season from the Richards Ranch.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you for having me on, not just today, but for all the shows we've done this year. It's been a real pleasure. I'm proud to be a part of, even if it's a small part of the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel, and hopefully we can keep going and doing more. And Merry Christmas to you as well, and Happy New Year.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, we're going on to 76, man.
All right, let's do it.
All right. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Tony.
Wow, what an amazing conversation. That's the thing I love about this show. I love to talk to my friends about pro wrestling history. And I love the fact that you guys can sit in on the conversation here on the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast. Bruno Sammartino had a fantastic year in 1975 as the 3WF champion. And what a lineup of great heels he had to draw in Baltimore and Philadelphia and Boston and New York City and Pittsburgh and all the great towns and buildings part of the 3WF in 1975. Thank you, Steve, so much for stopping by and spending some Christmas time with us here at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. Okay, on to my next guest. He is a very noted pro wrestling historian. When you want to talk about pro wrestling history, he is known for the AWA, the American Wrestling Association, but this guy knows a lot about pro wrestling history. The AWA notwithstanding, I mean, he's just a great guy to talk to. I always look forward to my conversations with George Schire, and George has stopped by here at the Richards Ranch, and we're going to talk about Verne Gagne, who held the AWA World title from 1968 all the way to 1975. And that November night that he dropped it to Nick Bockwinkel. George was there at the show, and we're going to talk about that night. We're going to talk about Verne's title reign. We're going to talk about that night that Verne dropped the title to Nick Bockwinkel there in St. Paul, Minnesota. Let's go to that conversation now with my dear personal friend, Mr. George Schire, here at the Richards Ranch. Well, Merry Christmas, everybody. We are continuing on with our Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel big Christmas Super Show. And I'd love to welcome in my dear friend, George Schire. And we're going to talk about the AWA World title in 75. And Verne Gagne held it most of the year. And there was a historic title change at the end of the year. But before we get to that, George, let me wish you Merry Christmas, man.
Hey, same to you. You know, this is the time of the year where I really like it. It seems to bring everybody a little bit closer, and we need that. We need peace and closeness. So
That's right.
Merry Christmas to you too.
You bet. You bet. Yeah, it's a happy holiday season. I got my tree up and got the Richards Ranch all decorated, and my mom's all happy. So that makes me happy.
I got to come up with a neat name for the Shire household. You always say the Richards Ranch.
Yeah,
This is just our home. I got to get something clever like that Richards Ranch thing.
you bet, man.
That's good.
Yeah, the Shire Estate, maybe something like
Well,
that.
who knows? Who knows?
All right. Well, let's talk about Verne held the title for a long, long time. He won it. What was it? 68 was his latest reign, and it lasted till 75. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, as I was thinking about that, when you had told me this is what we were going to discuss, I always found it interesting, Tony, that Verne won the title, the AWA title, back from Mad Dog Vachon after a 3-year hiatus that he had given it to Vachon in the mid 60s. And Verne won it back on his birthday, February 26th, 1967, from Mad Dog. And he held the title then for, I guess you'd say, about a year and a half, because it was August 17th of 68. So a year and a half or so later, he dropped it for 2 weeks to Dick Beyer, who was Dr. X under the mask at the time. He dropped it to Dr. X for 2 weeks and then won it back on August 31st of 68. And then he had that run until the loss to Nick in November of 75. So I often thought, and the reason I thought about it too was because I had talked with Dick Beyer about that one time, and why it was such a short reign, because Doc was so hot here at the time as our heel. And he told me, he says, Verne just said, this is what we're going to do to keep you hot for another year. And we'll drop the belt to you, because then Doc was here another additional year before he eventually left for a while. So, when you talk about Verne, he really did. He took care of Doc by putting him over. And in the meantime, you could say he interrupted what would have been an even longer reign as AWA champion if you added the full year and a half to that reign when he lost to Nick. And he certainly, I remember folks saying that, was he ever trying to beat Bruno's title reign at the time? I don't know if there's any truth to that or anything, Tony, but I honestly, if I was to be fair, I don't think Verne ever thought about it. I don't think he ever gave one iota about Bruno Sammartino's title reign.
Well, I was going to ask you about Lou Thez, because like I've heard people say he was trying to beat Lou Thesz's longevity of a singular long run with the title, because of the animosity that Thez never put Verne over. I was going to ask you, is any validity to that?
That is an interesting question, and that wouldn't surprise me. I wish, Tony, I went to the 1999 inaugural opening of it was the Newton Museum at the time, the one that's in Waterloo now. It was in Newton, Iowa, opened up the George Tragos Lou Thez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame. And I was at the inaugural one in April of 1999 in Newton. And of course, the two first wrestlers inducted in there were Verne and Lou. And so it was so unique that whole weekend, because they were actually chatting together. You could see them laughing together. They just, it seemed like they were old army buddies or something. And that was one of the times when Verne had said, I could beat you today and I could take you today. And he was doing that. And I took, and I'll share these with you privately, I took 3 or 4 photos of Verne and Lou inside the ring at that inaugural event. And they were doing the poses together like we're going to go at it,
Yeah, sure.
And then they raised each other's hands. But then, later on, Lou had told me, and I'd shared this, I think, with you one time, that he told me, he says, I wasn't very nice to Verne Gagne through the years, but I really do think they had just a tremendous respect for one another. And, you talked about how things worked out. We talk about working out with Jack Briscoe and things, getting the title eventually. I think if Verne wouldn't have had that opportunity to buy into the Minneapolis Wrestling Club at that late 59 time period. I mean, he'd always been in the background, but never an owner. And I think when that opportunity came up, that just put his own mindset in a different direction. And he probably at that point just said, the hell with Lou Thesz.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna start this company. And we know the story, how it goes from there. So and then, it's interesting because in 67, Lou Thesz had come in to the AWA after he had lost the title to Gene Kiniski, the NWA title. And Lou had been in the AWA and he had some matches. And I have a program for Minneapolis where it really states that, they kayfabe these things, but this was reality coming through. And Lou says in there, and I could share that little article with you too.
That'd be awesome.
He said that I hope that Verne doesn't dodge me and overlook me the way I rubbed him in the time I was champion. And this was still in the time period where they were putting NWA and AWA in front of the world title when they were talking world champion. Lou was referred to at that time as a former world champion. And so then they did have a match. Was it one or two matches in the AWA? But one of them was Chicago, and Verne did go over. But we all know that by that time, Lou was no longer involved and was never going to get another NWA run. And, maybe that was the passing of the torch from Lou. Who knows? But I really do. I think that they did really respect one another, despite that professional animosity where,
I think by that time, Lou was more focused on the paycheck than he was the keeping the legend alive. You know.
Well, and he had taken the title from Buddy Rogers, the NWA title from Buddy Rogers, and he held it for 3 years there until he dropped it to Gene in 1966.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're coming up on the anniversary of that in January.
Yep. And he dropped it to Gene Kiniski, and then basically he was done. I mean, and he was a lot older than Verne. I mean, Lou was born in the early 1900s,
right?
Where Verne was in 1926. So he had maybe 15, 10, 20 years on him. I don't know. I don't remember what Lou's date was.
Lou started wrestling at such a young age.
Yeah.
Hey, I was going to ask you, like, the AWA title changed hands fairly frequently in the 60s, but not so much in the 70s. What was the big difference there?
Part of it was, Tony, that in the initial onset of the AWA in 1960, Verne, aside from having Minneapolis, which we'll always call the headquarters, and that includes St. Paul, but he had a lot less exposure and cities. The AWA wasn't in Denver at that point yet. It wasn't in Milwaukee and some of the other cities. He had Omaha, the Omaha territory, and Chicago, etc. But a lot of it had to do with Verne. As much as people will say he didn't like to put people over, he did put people over. He did it to build them up. And a lot of them were his friends. When Bill Miller as Mr. M had Miller got about an 8-month reign from January of 62 to August of 62. I don't know the exact dates off the top of my head, but that was a time where he put his friend Bill Miller over as Mr. M. And then, when the dog came in, Mad Dog, there was a mutual friendship there. And again, you talk about when you have a chance to sit with the wrestlers. Mad Dog said to me one time, he said, in his usual Mad Dog way, he says, I didn't like Verne Gagne, but he said, Verne always took care of me in the next breath. And he said, Verne was always, and this is a fact, Verne was always true to his word. That's what the dog told me. And so Verne realized in 1964, 65, when it got time to put the title on the dog for a while, he drew so darn well.
Right.
You know, Mad Dog was putting people in the seats, and Verne could be the persistent challenger. The storyline was good that the dog was dodging him. Mad Dog will wrestle anybody, but he won't wrestle me. And so Mad Dog had that 3-year run with a little bit of a bump in there, like losing it to the Crusher for a coffee break. You know, but again, that was in those days, Verne was interested in building rematches and keeping a program going between two big names. And so that's really what it was. And Verne, in the back of his mind, I think he always said, I'm the champ anyway, so nobody, it doesn't matter. You know, I'm going to.
You know,
So on. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that the Worldwide Wrestling Federation was just like maybe 2 or 3 guys, and Vince Sr. having the majority say about who his champion was going to be. And then the National Wrestling Alliance was such a political machine,
yeah,
with several people on the championship committee, but Sam really was the last word. And Sam was usually the one who was putting forth the guys' names and things like that. In the AWA, it was Verne and Wally Carbo. Did they agree on things like that, or did Verne pretty much, was he the one who made the decision about who the champion was going to be, or how did that work?
Once Verne took over the Minneapolis territory, which became the AWA in August of 60, Verne had the majority say in everything. And, you know, it's funny when you look back in hindsight, because you would have never been able to figure that out, because Verne never, ever was on screen as the background or the promoter or having any say. It was always Wally. Wally was the front man. He was the voice. But they had a friendship at that point in their lives. They'd been together for a lot of years, Wally and Verne, because Wally was involved with the NWA, you know, with Dennis Stecker and even Tony previously before that, Tony Stecker. So Verne had the final say, but Wally was very respected to Verne until in the 80s. They had a falling out, which, you know, happens to a lot of people in partnerships, marriages, whatever, things like this happen. They did have a falling out, but in the end, even that was put aside, the very end. Yeah. You know, they came back together. But Wally was his right-hand man, and Verne always wanted to be the champion. And I really think his mindset, Tony, was what I said a moment ago. Even when he had the title on the dog or whoever it was briefly, in his mind, he was the champ. And, you know, they referred to him that way, the champ. He was always the champ.
We covered before in a previous podcast we did this year about how Hercules Cortez car accident played a role in Verne putting off the title change for a while. But in 75, he decides, okay, this is going to be the year. Bockwinkel and Stevens have been the tag team champions for a bit. And so now he's decided he's going to go with Nick as a single. And at the beginning of the year, they have that amazing match that survives on videotape in Chicago, where the people it was so exciting and electric. There were people who got shot at the matches.
Was that the January 26th Chicago card?
Yeah, yep. In Chicago, which I did an article for Wrestling Playlist. Charles over there writes about the history of wrestling on video, and he makes these compilations of all the historic things. And on those best matches of 75, since we don't have the Verne and Nick title change on video, I put that January match in there as one of the best matches of 1975. It's a great, great match.
Yeah, by all means.
So why did Verne want to wait until November? Because Nick and Ray kind of broke up as a tag team in the summer, right?
Yeah, but they did. Ray was kind of in and out for a little bit there, and
Ray had bought points in the Amarillo office.
Amarillo territory. Yeah. Stevens, if you look at Nick's or Verne's record, first of all, let's just say that in 75, Verne and Nick wrestled 5 times in singles matches. Mm-hmm. And so that one in January was the first one.
And a couple of those were in Chicago. I mean,
yes,
several of those. How many did you say? 5?
yep. There were the one on January 26th of 75 in Chicago, and then there was a rematch
In March.
on yeah, it was March 15th or something.
Yeah.
Did I have breakfast this morning, Lorraine? I can't remember. And then I come out with a date of March 15th.
And that's exactly right. It was March 15th.
Okay. Well, so I know there were the 2 Chicago matches. And then if you look at the results record of Verne defending the title in 75, his singles matches were his title defenses were, again, 2 more after that, the 2 we just talked about, to Nick. And then he also defended to Von Raschke, which got a few, Baron got a few shots. And Baron was really hot at the time. He in 1975, he had a huge program against Billy Robinson. And he had another feud with Pampero Firpo, who was a babyface at that point.
Also, that summer, he defended it against Nick's tag team partner, Ray Stevens.
He did a couple, 3 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there was one. In July of 75. I know he wrestled Ray. I want to say Milwaukee or someplace without looking. I think
it was in. One of them was in Omaha. It was a 2 out of 3 fall match. And the other one was in a town called Beloit,
Wisconsin. Yeah, that's a little tiny. It's a kind of a small suburb of. It's not as far as Milwaukee, but yeah, that's a smaller town. I don't know if that would have been a spot show or not, because Beloit did run semi-regularly, and I think that match probably took place in, again, probably June sometime for Stevens.
Yeah,
and then Ray was a little bit gone after that again. What you have to think about too is that Verne wrestled in tag team matches that year with Greg, and they were against Bockwinkel and Heenan. A couple of them were Bockwinkel and Stevens. So that match for the November, I think Verne was really just playing it out and making sure that, because Verne could win these other matches and he could lose, and Nick could brag in a tag match that they beat him. And I mean, it was a psychology game, which we know wrestling is.
Oh yes, absolutely. Now, that the match that he had with Nick in June in Iowa, was that the match where the belt got stolen?
Oh yeah, that was in Davenport on July 25th. And that was the one where he was defending the title to Nick. The AWA title belt was on the ringside announcer's table. And this guy runs up, grabs it, heads for the exit, and got out of the building with it.
By the way, if you haven't checked out my show with Lib Ayub about the
beautiful
AWA title belt book, and all of the police reports and all are printed in the book. It's a fascinating story.
Yeah, and I want to commend him again too, because Lib he did an excellent job, and I was proud to be part of it with him on different things that, you know, he kept saying, "I want to get it right. I want to get it right." And I said, "Man, you nailed it." But yeah, it's all about the belt. That's the name of the book.
And we want to say that our thoughts and prayers are with Lib. Also, this holiday season, he just lost a very close family member. And
I'm sorry, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's been hard. So
okay, well, I'm going to reach out to him then. Do you know who it was in his family, or?
Yeah, it was his mom.
It was. Okay. Yeah. Well, I will reach out to him. I didn't know that, Tony, and I know you're very close to your mom, so I totally understand.
That's why it's really important to me, and I've been talking with him, and I just want him to have a peaceful holiday season.
Good. I'm going to reach out to him again then. But yeah, that's what they were doing. It really was. There were a lot of Greg and Verne matches with Bockwinkel and Heenan as a team.
Yes.
And they had a couple with Stevens. But that July 25th match in Davenport, that was interesting, I tell you. It's such a story.
I mean, so Heenan played that trio of Heenan and Stevens and Bockwinkel were just box office as far as heel heat. And then Heenan plays such an important role in the feud with Verne over the title. But another guy that was involved in their feud too was Bobby Duncombe, right?
Yep, and that's very true. And it's interesting because when Nick finally got to the title on November 8th of 1975, the night he was going to win it, and I want to talk about how they played that up too. But it was interesting because we were never told, they never announced that Bobby Heenan would not be with Nick at ringside, not even on television. And Nick it was just assumed because Bobby was always at his side. Mm-hmm. And Nick showed up with Bobby Duncombe. And Bobby had come into the AWA shortly before that. And Heenan had announced that if anybody wants to get at Nick or get at me, they're going to go through Bobby Duncombe first. So it was kind of like he was a policeman for Nick. But he come out at ringside on that title night. And Verne had brought Greg with him that night. And so no explanation at the arena either why Heenan wasn't there. And to be honest with you, I sat ringside that night for the match, and I would have never guessed that was the night it was going to happen. I didn't know.
I was going to ask you, what was the significance of having it change hands in St. Paul?
Verne, if you look at his title wins and losses of the AWA title, if you look at his results record, you'll see most of them were in the Twin Cities. This was his home.
I figured Minneapolis, but I wasn't sure about the St. Paul connection.
Oh, they were running back in 75. They were running both St. Paul and Minneapolis on a regular basis. I mean, if it wasn't in Minneapolis this week, it'd be in St. Paul and vice versa. So that wasn't unusual. Mm-hmm. And, he'd won it from Mad Dog, as we talked about earlier, in St. Paul in 67. And if you look back at his other matches with Mr. M, etc., usually they were in the Twin Cities. Verne was loyal. Was loyal to his hometown fans.
Yeah, was that just a case of him saying, well, we haven't done it in St. Paul for a while, they're due for a change or something like that? I
don't know if that would have been the mindset. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I mean, every territory has towns that play roles within the territory, right? Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to look at it. Like in the Crockett territory, Charlotte was the home of the territory, but Greensboro was the big town where a lot of things took place.
Yeah. Usually, though, Verne's title wins, losses, or biggest matches were usually, like you look back at his retirement match in May of 81. That was in St. Paul. Mm-hmm. Now, grant you, they were running more regular in St. Paul at that time period in the AWA, but it plays out where most of the matches that he won or lost were St. Paul matches or Minneapolis, if the other alternative.
Another example of that, we just had Don DeLeon on the podcast last week, who was the only photographer at the Miami Convention Center the night that Terry Funk won the title. And he said, I knew the title was going to change hands the minute I saw the television camera show up, because the title changes typically always happened in Tampa. But in Miami, I show up this night to take these photographs like I always do. He was the regular photographer. And they said, you can't be at ringside because unless you take your flash out of your camera. Right. You have to shoot without a flash because of the television. He said, gee, I know something's going to happen here tonight.
Well, see, and that's what's interesting too, Tony, because on that night of November 8th in St. Paul, as you had mentioned earlier, there was no television. There's no taping of it. We had no cameras.
Right.
The only the only photographer that was around ringside which was one of our regular photographers at the time, was a guy named Chris Christopherson, Art Christopherson.
Help me make it through the night.
Yeah, it was Art Christopherson, and he was taking pictures for Norman Kietzer's magazine at the time. He was a regular photographer. And I believe, and I didn't concentrate on this at the time, but I believe Mick Karch may have been at ringside, but then I'm not sure. Because Mick didn't shoot, he shot for every once in a while some of the newsstand magazines. But I don't think he was there. If he was, I missed it. But I know Christopherson. Let's leave it at that. It was Art. I can't get over that. Art Christopherson was one of my buddies, and the late Jim Melby, good buddies. The three of us did some fun things together back when we were goofy kids. So Art. But yeah, he took pictures. But again, the reason you would think nothing's going to happen, it's just going to be another ordinary Verne versus Nick match, was there was no, they didn't even announce Paul Pershman as being really any kind of a special referee, special troubleshooting referee.
I was going to ask you about the referee.
Yeah, Paul, of course, went on to become Playboy Buddy Rose, as fans know. But right. He had shortly before that, maybe just mere months, or probably only going on a year, he had come out of Verne's camp. Paul Pershman did, and he was trained by Verne. And he basically was still, and you know, as far as we could tell, we knew Verne always put his rookies, his trainees into refereeing positions here and there. If you look at old tapes of matches, you'll see a lot of his rookies, Jim Raschke, Dennis Stamp, you know, a lot of guys are in those referee roles. So that even wasn't a clue. Paul hadn't done anything to be noticed at that point. He had, you know, pretty much done a job for all the higher up guys, but he was getting training. That's what the deal was. So I really never gave it a moment's thought. And maybe that's why it becomes even more special when I've always looked back on it, because they surprised me. And I like to be surprised. Sometimes I knew what was going to happen. And this was one time, I admit, I had no clue.
The AWA would run typically somewhere between, let's just say, 18 and 20 shows a month. And is that about right?
Yeah.
They about 250 shows a year.
Yeah.
But how many title matches did you say Verne had? 6? 5, 6?
He had 5. He had 5 in 75. Count 5 counting the November loss. Yeah. But he had 5 matches, singles matches with Nick. Then I told you he also defended the title to Von Raschke. Right. He defended the title to Stevens that year a couple of times. He defended to Billy Robinson a couple of times. So, and then the tag team matches that you throw in there. Verne was pretty busy actually that year.
Yeah, my question is, with 6 to 8 title matches versus 250 house shows, that's not a lot of times for the World Championship to appear, but it seemed like the title was still really over in the AWA. What do you attribute that to?
Let me look at something here. Hold on. Hang on.
Because I've always subscribed to the theory that in wrestling, less is more generally. But that's really less. I mean, 6 to 8 title matches, and in the course of a couple of hundred house shows, that's not many times for fans to see the world title get defended, which I guess is a good thing, because I mean the title and Verne are really over, of course.
Okay, I just counted. I grabbed it over here. I just counted. Verne defended the title 15 times.
Okay.
From January to the November title loss. The match that he lost right before, or the match he won right before he lost to Nick, he beat Ox Baker in Chicago on November 1st.
Yeah, Ox was the big heel and bruisers promotion.
Right.
And so they were doing a lot of matches in Chicago.
Yeah. That was the last title defense.
That's about, 11-12% of the shows have the world title on them, which is not very much. But I'm just curious about you were there at the time, so that's
here was another thing. Verne had the idea back in the day that you didn't want to have the world champion on every single card. He kind of went into that mindset that when the world champ is in town because it was always said that Verne is they'd say the heavyweight king is defending the title all over the country, fans, and promoter Wally Carbo is trying to get this match signed.
Well, of course.
And so that was the mindset they wanted fans to believe. And so, which, when you looked at the NWA champion formula, it was rare when the champion came into a town.
No, maybe twice, 3 times a year, maybe.
Exactly. And so Verne did have that mindset that he wanted his appearance. Verne, you can never get upset with the guy. He knew how to promote himself. Mm-hmm. He wanted to always be over. And he said, I won't be in town every week defending the title, because in his way, that kind of cheapened the title. Then it takes away from the illusion that, he can't be everywhere else in the country if he's here every Saturday night. Well, so that's really what it was. And if you think about 15 title defenses from January to November 1st, when he had that match with Ox Baker, and then 16 if you count the Nick match, when he lost on November 8th. So 16 title defenses in 11 months. If you broke it down, that's 1 a month for the champ. That would be probably good. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
and then he's got tag team matches in there. He had a whole slew of tag team matches that always involved Bockwinkel, Heenan, or Stevens. So he was keeping that rivalry going. And Nick and Heenan could win some tag team matches, and Verne would be the one that lost the fall. I mean, that was played up, so Nick had victories over him. Not to mention, I'll point out to you that one of Nick's biggest boasting points leading up to his final title match, he had always bragged that he had no less than 5 wins over Verne Gagne throughout the time in the AWA, and yet Verne still held the title. Because Nick got victories in some tainted way or whatever it was. So Verne was smart. He built it up over a long period of time. And then, like I say, Tony, as a fan, we've heard the stories for years how when Ivan Koloff beat Bruno in January of 71, how it came out of nowhere. There wasn't a fan there that had expected Koloff, because he'd lost to Koloff or lost to Bruno many times before. Bruno was unbeatable for 8 years, almost 8 years. And, maybe when you think about it, that's what makes all of this even more exciting. There was, like you said, you walk in and you see TV cameras all over and officials all over you. Right away, the light goes on. Well, we're here for something big. But Verne didn't do that.
Well, except for nowadays. I mean, modern times, television cameras are at every show. Just about,
exactly.
Back then, that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about something else. The next night, after Bockwinkel beats Verne for the title, he's got a tag team match in Milwaukee where Paul Pershman, who was the referee in the match, is his tag team partner. Yeah.
Yep, and they went against Greg and Brunzell.
Right.
Now, I will tell you that it was announced right away that Verne had lost the title. And that next night, for Milwaukee fans, that would have been a sort of a kind of a revenge match. Greg, if you were at the Verne Gagne loss, Paul Pershman, though he wasn't any supposedly special type of referee, it came out later they wanted to try and push that he was in cahoots with Nick.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Or did Bobby Heenan pay Pershman? Those little comments were made. And what had happened is when Paul was being distracted by Greg and Verne on the side, Nick on the side of the ring, Duncombe took a shot at Verne, and he became an easy pin for Verne or for Nick. That's how it ended up. So Duncombe didn't technically interfere because the referee never saw it, but they let it stick. And that was another thing. When we left the arena that night, at least I did, and I was with Jim Melby that night. We went to the card together, and we talked about it, that, well, they're probably going to reverse the decision here because Duncombe actually got that sucker punch in, but it never happened.
So you mentioned,
but that was Verne's way of not typically losing. He had that little background where I didn't really get beat because.
Right. You mentioned earlier how hot Baron von Raschke was in '75, and he had several title matches with Verne. Why didn't Verne feel that Baron could be the champion?
It wasn't that Verne didn't feel he could. Obviously he took care of Baron pretty good because he brought him into the business.
Right.
But I don't know that Verne ever considered putting the title on him. I don't. I think that Baron was so hot at that time.
You and I've discussed many times about Billy Robinson. You can put it on him, but how do you get it off of him?
Right.
But we've never talked about Baron, so I was just curious about your thoughts on it.
Yeah, well, and I don't think Verne had the mindset again. By the time he had gotten to Nick, and though it got derailed a little bit in the first part of the 70s, and that's a true story, that it probably the title change would have happened sooner, but Verne found the golden goose with Heenan or with Bockwinkel and Stevens together. Mm-hmm. And that allowed him then to do what he had intended to do when he was going to lose the title, is to wrestle less, take care of behind the scenes promoting, etc. That was Verne's plan all along. So even though he had 15 title defenses in 75, now when he got to 1976, he could wrestle even less. And when he did, a lot of tag matches, if you look at his results, he would team with Greg and Jim or one of them, or he'd be in 6-man tag matches that, he didn't have to work hard.
How long do you think it was before Verne decided that November was going to be the day in St. Paul?
Knowing that they planned, usually, and Verne and Wally always did this, knowing that they usually planned out a program about 6 months down the road where they wanted to be. And, Nick had gotten title shots and some tag bouts and things throughout the year. I'm going to guess that when it hit to the November date, I'm going to guess that it was for sure back in May or June, or maybe just a month earlier.
Oh, wow.
That Verne had this figured out, that the fall was going to be. And here's the other thing. The fall of the year, November 8th is still fall here. That's when our attendance picks up. The people are coming back. So he knew if he did it during the summer, we had lighter attendance, etc. all the time.
The reason I ask is because Bockwinkel and Stevens have another main event title match in Chicago with Bruiser and Crusher a couple of weeks after. So I was wondering.
That typically, though, if you look at there was a couple of other times where Crusher had or tag team matches against Nick after he became champion. I think he teamed with Furpo in a couple of them. Crusher did, and that barely was just to get Crusher over, because he was going to be one of those consistent challengers to Nick because they had a good chemistry together.
Right. And then Larry Hennig has taken his summer vacation in Florida, and he came back, and he's Bockwinkel's first title defense.
Now that's interesting when you say that too, because I had thought even for a little bit that maybe Verne was going to put the title on Larry for a little bit. There's a study in relationships between Verne and Larry. They didn't do a lot of talking outside the ring. They had this animosity towards one another. And Larry, he would tell you he hated the ground Verne walked on. But the truth be told, they had another mutual respect for one another because they each knew they could use each other. And this is fact. Verne never, I've talked about this on other podcasts, Verne never buried Larry Hennig in the AWA. He was main event from from 1963 on, even as early as 62, Larry was a main event guy. And Verne used him for that reason. And Larry had the advantage because he didn't want to normally leave for long periods of time. He wanted to be home, wanted to be here in the AWA. And, you know, we've talked about that. Larry was so good. He could have went to any territory and probably been their main man. And every time he went to a territory, he got a decent push, but he was never going to be there forever. So a lot of times you're not going to, you know, push the guy that hard, because it's always about the guy that's going to be the one making the money for you.
Well, what's interesting,
Verne and Larry made money.
What was interesting in Florida was that Hennig was in cahoots with Bob Roop, and he was one of the top heels down there. And
yeah, he was working as a heel again. Yeah.
Yeah.
But up here, that was a year into his, well, he went to the Axe deal just the year before, shortly before that. And he was so over as Larry the Axe. I mean, every fan had forgotten the Dolly sisters and forgotten his escapades with Harley Race and Lars Anderson. And you know, Larry was over. Technically, he was as hot as the Crusher was for a good period of time there, as being the babyface on the card. And Verne and Larry even teamed up a little bit there.
Yeah.
For some matches.
And then in December, Nick defends the title against Firpo and some more matches with Hennig to wrap up the year. But Nick Bockwinkel, even though it's 1975 before he gets the title, is he thought of more as the champion of the 70s than Verne?
Well, I never thought about that. It actually puts them almost 50-50.
Right.
Because Verne had it for the first 5 years, and technically, well, 4 years, I guess, Nick would have had it.
Well, you and I both know how much videotape influences people's thoughts and feelings, and there would be much more video of Nick as the champion.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, maybe in that sense, yeah, if you put the video aspect into it.
Because a lot of people didn't see Verne in his prime years as champion.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in that, the way you put it that way, I think maybe Nick definitely would be the person that represented the AWA and was thought of as the AWA. And definitely even that year after he lost it back to Verne in 1980 and lost, you know, till 1981. Even then, Nick was considered the champ from 75 through 1986 or whatever the final time was.
Yeah, that quintessential big silver AWA belt, I think, and Nick Bockwinkel just kind of go together, I think.
And you know, it's so interesting too, Tony, because I had talked at the onset when we talked about Verne putting the title for 2 weeks on Dick Beyer, Dr. X. Verne wanted to take care of his guys. And like I said, Dick and him knew when his program was coming to an end. And this was a way to keep him hot for another year, because now he'd had the title. He had beaten the champ. And then it set him up for a long run with Billy Red Lyons when Lyons came in the night that Verne won the title back from Doc. So they had that all set up too.
Right.
But with Nick, I mean, it made Nick better because he didn't get the title right away. And Verne knew how to make that program. And again, I think that's what we alluded to a minute ago with Bruno and Koloff. You know, the mutual respect was that when I drop the title, I'll drop it to Koloff. And Nick was Verne's heir apparent.
Yeah.
And Nick told me one time, he said this many times actually, but he said, Verne and him always had the best professional relationship. And Nick says, although I always knew that it was his company. Mm-hmm. So Nick said, I never let up my guard that, you know, on a given notice, Verne could change plans. But he said, I never had a problem with that.
Yeah. Verne
took care of me. And he said, he gave me the belt. And at any given time, at any point in time, if Verne would have said, Nick, I want you know, when you talk about the infamous Stan Hansen, Nick Bockwinkel thing a decade later, if it would have happened that same way for Nick to be called into the locker room or the shower and all the stories, if he'd have been called in on the night of a match and Verne would have said to him at any given time, hey, Nick, I want you to drop the title to whoever the heel or the babyface was at the time, I promise you, Nick would have not had a blink. He would have went out and done what he was asked to do. Yeah. And we know that wasn't the case with the Hansen situation, and that's how that happened. Hansen got blindsided. Had Nick been blindsided during his reign, Nick would have handled it in a better way and probably a more professional way. But we're talking different characters here.
Sure. Well, I tell you, that's a great way to wrap up our special episode for Christmas, talking about the title change between Verne Gagne and Nick Bockwinkel. And George, I can't wait, because pretty soon we're going to get over into 1976, and that's going to be a lot of fun working with you on that.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. You know, you're talking my prime years here. I tell you. I want to just say one more thing before we close on the Nick and Verne.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, Nick had complete support from Verne, and it was discussed in 1980. And this was definitely discussed between the two of them. Verne told Nick that he was going to retire from wrestling officially, and he wanted to get that title back one more time. Verne had this storyline in his head. He wanted to go out as the aging champion. Can he be beat? Can he go out as world champion? So he had to get it back from Nick one more time. That added to his legacy. And it had been 6 years or 5 years at that point that, you know, Nick had dodged him, etc. They could use that story. And so when Verne took it back in June of 80, I think it was, without looking, and he held it for the next 9, 10 months, 11 months, he announced right away, I'm going to retire. And he set up his own retirement program. And it was a big deal, Tony. If you were here in May of 81, the governor of Minnesota named it Verne Gagne Day, proclamation. The newspapers had big stories on Verne Gagne because this was his home, Minneapolis, sure. Yeah. St. Paul. And they had stories about his long run in the wrestling business. And has Father Time finally caught up with him? Will Nick take the title from him that night and ruin his retirement party? And it was a clean win. Nick lost to Verne that night. But again, you talk about Verne taking care of Nick. A lot of people right away said, well, we should have had this big tournament and this guy should have had a shot at this and, whatever. Verne just immediately announced through Stanley Blackburn that a tournament would have taken too long. The AWA needs to have their champion defending the title. And because of his long years of service to the AWA, and there's a video of that out there, you can find that on YouTube. Stanley Blackburn is talking with Nick and Bobby Heenan. Because of the long record, Nick is being given the title back. Verne took care of him.
Yeah. And Verne had been, that's 31 years in the business by 1981. I mean,
he started on May 3rd of 1949. And, that's the story, too. His retirement match was on May 10th. They made a big deal of that this was the day he started in the business 30-some years before on May 10th. And he'd gotten out of the Army on May 10th. And I guess he'd said he'd gotten married on May 10th. And it really was, his first match was May 3rd.
Oh, wow.
I think I told you that story, didn't I? What Greg did at Verne's funeral?
Yeah.
Yeah, he told me, he says, wasn't Verne born on, or wasn't his first match May 10th? I said, no, that's what you said. I said, it was May 3rd. And I have the program. I gave a copy to Greg.
That's funny.
He debuted on May 3rd against King Kong Kashi in St. Paul, or Minneapolis.
You bet. Well, George, thank you so much. Another great time spent with you. One of the best Christmas presents I could have, just to sit around and talk wrestling with you. So thank you. And give my best to your lovely wife, and happy holidays to the Schire home.
My thanks to you. I love talking with you, man. And
right, man.
Yeah, Merry Christmas again to you and your sweet mom. And I'm looking forward to 76.
Wow, I'm having a great time. That was a fantastic conversation with my buddy George Schire about Verne Gagne and Nick Bockwinkel and the American Wrestling Association and the world title situation in 1975 and the transition finally to Nick Bockwinkel so Nick can have his run starting there in November 1975. You know, for Christmas, as I've gotten older, you know, when I was a young kid, I was just like everybody else. I looked forward to the presents and the arrival of Santa Claus and all the wonderful things that I had been wanting all year long to be under the tree. Sometimes, you know, I'd run in from the bedroom that morning and Santa had been there the night before and there'd be a new bicycle under the tree. It wasn't wrapped or anything, just be there. I remember the first Christmas present that I ever got from my mom and I think I was about 3 or 4 years old, and we lived in a little bitty house that my mom and dad could just barely afford, and we were very very poor, you know. But as a kid, I didn't realize that, and I wanted my dad, of course, was a cowboy, and he was a quarter horse trainer, and we all were always around horses, and so I wanted a rocking horse on springs, you know, a toy horse that sat on a spring frame, and you got on it and you rode the horse, right? And so my mom got so excited. So my mom would have been about 22 years old at the time, and I would have been about 3, maybe 4. But I can remember there was an upstairs to this old house that maybe had 3 rooms downstairs and then an upstairs attic. And my mom took me up there about 3 days. She was so excited she couldn't wait. She took me up there and put me on that horse and let me ride the horse before Christmas time. And then Christmas morning, of course, I couldn't wait to see my horse underneath the tree. And that's the excitement of Christmas when you're a kid, right? As you grow up and you become an adult, relationships become so much more important, and you become more thankful that you still have great friends and great relationships, and just spending time with them is the Christmas gift that you like most of all. And that's like it is for me here at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel today, because my next guest is a very close friend. We have gotten to know each other very well. We enjoy calling each other, texting each other, and talking. Sometimes we record those conversations for the podcast, and sometimes we don't. My good friend down in Georgia, Jerry Oates, who had the very first match with Terry Funk after he won the NWA World Title in 1975. And Jerry was working in Kansas City, and I want to talk to Jerry about that match, about his conversations with Terry, and about those 2 or 3 days that Terry Funk was in the Kansas City territory immediately after winning the title in Miami. Let's go to that conversation at the Richards Ranch right now with my good friend, Jerry Oates. Well, we're doing the Christmas Super Show here at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. Tony Richards back here again at the Richards Ranch, and I couldn't think of anybody better to have as my guest this evening than my good friend Jerry Oates. Jerry, how you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing good. Cold down here in Columbus, Georgia.
Well, man, I tell you, you're supposed to be warmer the further south you go.
That's what I heard.
I moved 300 miles south, but it's still just as cold as it was when I lived up there in Missouri. So
I'm sure.
But it's been an unusual year, I think, for the weather. It's been a little colder than usual, especially in the south. Hey, yes. I want to go back. We've been all year now. This year, we've been talking about 1975. And something really good happens here at the end of the year. Terry Funk wins the NWA World Heavyweight Championship in Miami, Florida on December the 10th. Then he leaves there and comes to Kansas City to Memorial Hall the next night on December the 11th, where you wrestle him in a match. Did you see Terry before the match or anything?
No. When I got there, I'm expecting to wrestle Briscoe.
Right.
And I was there quite a while. And somebody came up, the referee came in and said, "You know Terry Funk's here." I said, "Terry Funk?" I said, "What's he doing here?" I said, "Is Briscoe over there?" He said, "No." He said, "Terry's the world champion." I said, "What?" And then right then I knew I was going to wrestle him.
Yeah. Yeah. I just posted in the Facebook group that Tuesday, the advertisement said you and Briscoe in the paper.
That is correct.
And then even right up until the day of it, they still were advertising Briscoe because you had to get the ad in, and Terry didn't win the title till that late that night, Wednesday night. And then, of course, Fritz von Erich sends a telegram out. But you're in Kansas City. I don't know if they would have sent that telegram to Kansas City or if they'd have sent that to St. Joe. But
I have no idea. I'm sure Geigo knew it.
So you find out that Terry's there instead of Jack, but you never talked with him until you got in the ring?
Right.
Did you say anything, or did he say anything when you got there?
Congratulations! What a shock!
Because back in those days, and a lot of fans now who watch wrestling don't really know this, but back in those days, you got in the ring, and the referee, you met in the center of the ring, and the referee checked you and gave you instructions. And so a lot of times when you went to the middle of the ring, you said hello or talked or whatever, and that was probably when you congratulated him, right?
I did.
Yeah. What was his reaction to that?
He just grinned, and then before the bell, we shook hands, and then we had our match.
Yeah. We had on a show last week, we had Don De Leon on, and he was the only photographer in Miami that night. And he was backstage when Terry came through the door, and he said he had never seen Terry Funk so genuinely happy in his life when he came through the door with the world title.
Well, I mean, that's, if you want it, I mean, that's the ultimate. Back then, that was the ultimate title. That thing Bockwinkel had, I didn't put any stock in that, I just.
Well, you were an NWA guy. I mean, you grew up in Georgia, and
that was well.
Yeah, you grew up seeing the champ. You grew up seeing Gene Kaniski and Luthez and
exactly,
and Dory Jr.
Dory Jr.
Yeah, who I've got a lot of respect for as a champion.
Oh, he was. That's like asking people today, who was the best running back in the NFL ever? Well, over the years things change, but to me, Dory was the ultimate champion. Didn't throw a lot of punches. Fantastic in that ring. He was a ring general. No clowning, no cutting up. I mean, he had it 4 years.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that?
Right. Right before, there's a story that I was talking about, and I put it in the Dory Funk Senior book that I'm writing. Excuse me. Right before they walked into the 1968 NWA convention, Senior and Terry and Dory Jr. were meeting and talking. And Senior said, I think I can get the world title for one of you. And he said, Terry, you got the interview. Like you would be the best on television for interviewing. Dory, you've got the work. Like you work like a world champion. You've got the work. And Terry said, let's go with Dory Jr. And so Terry just kind of backed up and just said, I think Dory should get it. And so he got it. Senior went in and lobbied for him, and he got the title. But,
and really never heard of him.
Yeah, Terry had not been around very, very long.
What about Dory?
Oh, Dory Jr., you mean?
Yeah, I mean, they say that in Amarillo.
Mm-hmm.
But what a shock that was. That was the best choice ever, in my opinion.
Yeah, he was. Go ahead.
Good. He was a no-nonsense champion.
Who did you say?
Harley.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So did you see Terry after the match in Kansas City?
Yeah, I went over and congratulated him. I told him, I said, you'll make a good champion, man. I mean, I've known him. I knew him before he even got in the business, and I respected that.
But you guys had matches all that year over the international title, and
right.
And you guys had a couple of you went Broadway a couple times, right?
Exactly. exactly.
And Terry was not necessarily, and I want everybody to know, I'm saying this with the utmost respect, but Terry was not known to be a Broadway wrestler. I mean, he was a 15, 20-minute, a lot of action and a lot of brawling. And
when that bell rang, he was wide open.
Right. But you guys had some fantastic matches that went the full hour.
Exactly.
Over the international title. And so they got confidence that this is going to be a great match, even though I don't know if they knew it was going to be Terry or not, but it turned out to be. And so you guys had a great match there in Kansas City. And so you go over after the match and you congratulate him. Terry's always kind of in a good mood and laughing, right?
He's always in a good mood. He was always in a good mood. He was a very likable guy, and Dory was likable, but Dory was quiet.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't get in a hurry. I knew we was at St. Louis TV one time on a Sunday, and he had to catch a plane in like 30 minutes, and he's still getting dressed. They said, "Come on, Junior, hurry up. We got to go to the airport." He said, "We'll be all right." He just didn't get in a hurry.
Yeah,
and and it was hard on them. Getting home when they had time off for where they lived to Amarillo.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Briscoe moved to Atlanta. You can get in out of Atlanta 24 hours a day,
right?
And Harley lived in the perfect spot, Kansas City, in the middle of the country.
Yeah, there were a couple of times where they were supposed to wrestle in St. Louis, but the flight was late and they weren't going to be able to make it. And they had Dory Seniors got mad because he had to get a private plane to take them to St. Louis a couple of times, from Amarillo, because, it's kind of like the Columbia where I lived. The airline would be late because it wasn't one of their main places or whatever, or maybe a flight would get canceled and everybody would get mad at the airport.
The cancellation.
They get mad at the airport. Well, it wasn't the airport's fault. It was the airline, but it's funny how people think about the airport being the problem. And Amarillo, they probably ran into the same thing where some of their flights got misdirected or changed or canceled or whatever. So the next night, Terry wrestles a guy that you had their program with that year over the Central States title, Ed Wiskowski, who a lot of later fans know as Colonel De Beers, but he's a local St. Joe guy. So were you there for that match at all?
Yes. It was a good piece of talent.
He could work, right?
Yeah, he was awesome. I didn't like that Colonel De Beers crap.
No, I liked him as Ed.
He was out in Oregon when I was there.
Yeah. And so then after that Friday night, the next night, usually Saturday night, was Des Moines, and you wrestled Terry again. So do you remember anything about the Des Moines match?
Yeah, he got his hand raised.
He's a world champion, right?
Yeah, he rode back with my brother and I back to Kansas City. I don't know where he was, after that. But
so you remember anything? I mean, that's a couple-hour car ride. Do you remember anything about the car ride?
Yeah, he said that belt was already wearing him out.
And it's only been 3 days.
Yeah, I mean, you got to hustle. I know the first time I met Harley, when he won it the first time, he had it 9 days. And that's the first time we had ever been to the Omni in Atlanta. And I'd never met him. And so I went up and talked to him. I said, "What's it like being the champion?" He said, "Daddy, I've had this thing 9 nights and I've done 9 hours."
Yeah.
Because a lot of people didn't know Harley.
Right.
I mean, didn't.
Yeah, it was early on. And he'd been a tag team wrestler for a lot of that with Larry Hennig. And he'd been out West Texas a lot, which is that a lot of people hadn't seen him at that point in the other territories. Terry left Des Moines then and flew back to Florida, and he had, of course, the return match with Briscoe is going to be money. So they got him in Orlando. He goes against Rocky Johnson. Then Tuesday night in Tampa, they have the return match with Jack Briscoe. And then it's funny, in Miami, they don't come back with Briscoe. They come back with Cyclone Negro. And he has a couple matches with Negro. And then they go to Atlanta to the City Auditorium and have Terry and Jack have a match. And then Terry goes back to Florida again to wrap up the year, and he has a match with Dusty and Dick Slater, of all people, and then back to Georgia for a couple of days, and then, he's off to wrap up the year. But his travels are just beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, because, back then they went everywhere, like you said, Australia, New Zealand, everywhere. And
since we're talking about the world title, and we've talked about this before, but I wanted to bring it up again because we're talking about world titles on this particular show. But you shared with me, and it's in one of our podcasts we had before, but we're always getting new listeners, so I want to just say it again here. But they talked to you briefly about getting the NWA world title, right?
They did.
And that was Bob Geigel talked to you, right?
He asked me, it was in Kansas City. He came down to the dressing room. He said, I need to talk to you. I said, okay. So we went up on the stage. It was just he and I. He said, they're getting ready to make a switch. Talking about the title.
Yes.
And he said, they need a drop guy. And he said, would you be interested? I said, are you talking about for the world title? He said, yes. He said, it would be for 6 months. And I'm thinking, in 6 months, I'll go everywhere with that title. And I knew the traveling, but not in detail what it would really be like. Mm-hmm. Once you win that thing, you're gone.
Right. You got to go with the schedule, wherever it's at, whatever it is.
Got the champions bookings. And then he told me, he said, I'm going to see what I can do about that. He said, would you be interested? And I said, I would. He said, there's some money that has to come with that.
Mm-hmm. The bond, you'd have to put up the bond.
Yes.
Which he think was $25,000 at that time.
It was. Yeah. And he told me, he said, can you get the money? I said, the money is no problem. He said they pay. He said that money will go to St. Louis and they pay 10% on that money until you get it back. And then he asked me, he said, where will you get that kind of money? Mm-hmm. I said, I have two options. And he said, what are they? I said, well, my dad is one of them and Fred Ward is the other. Either one of them would have done it for me. Because I didn't have $25,000.
Right. Well, sure. Now, if you would have gotten the title for 6 months, and we're talking about back in the 70s, where the NWA title pretty much was defended almost every day and everywhere, how much do you think you would have made in 6 months?
I often wondered that. I often wondered. And see, I would have been somebody that nobody would have known except in the South, or Georgia, because I had been nowhere. And I think sometimes that's kind of good. Mm-hmm. This guy from nowhere is all of a sudden a world champion. But I could have made my mark in that 6 months with it. My name, yes. Really made a name. And anytime you'd have went back to Japan, the money would have been more because you'd have formed a world heavyweight champion. I mean, the money, I guess back then, in 6 months, I just don't know.
But Jerry, let me ask you this. Was there anywhere you wrestled? Because I'm just thinking, you mentioned Japan. You went to Japan, you got over. I mean, they put the Asian tag team titles on you guys. Was there anywhere you went in your career where you didn't get over? Because there were places Terry didn't wrestle before he got the title.
The only place when I started in Florida, came to Georgia, and then they sent me to Mobile. I'd only been wrestling maybe a year. So they sent me to Mobile from Georgia, and I really didn't like that.
Was that for Lee Fields?
Huh?
Lee Fields?
Yeah. And that's kind of like two territories in one. You got like the Dothan side, then you got the Mississippi side. And so they put me, I'd wrestle in Mobile and like Hattiesburg, Meridian, that side. And I
Gulfport? Gulfport? Do you wrestle in Gulfport?
Not then. The only place at the time I wrestled in Gulfport was for Watts.
I see.
Where down there on the Florida town, the big town.
Pensacola?
Pensacola, yeah, I wrestled there. And that was such a clique, you know. And I love being there with Ken Lucas. I thought the world of him. He was a great guy.
What a baby face.
Yes, gosh. But Bob Kelly was doing the booking. And here I am, young. And so all this time passed, and I finally go to a reunion in Florida. In Mobile, rather. I'd never been to one. And Bob Kelly was there. He said, I need to talk to you a second. He said, Greg Peterson was there.
Mm-hmm.
What a worker he was.
Oh, yeah.
They had some workers, you know, but those guys have been there forever. And here I am, young, and I'm not going to get any push. And you know what he told me? He said, I missed the boat with you. I'm going. We're talking 35 years later.
Right.
But I enjoyed it. But no, I didn't get over there because I didn't have a chance.
But Jerry, I mean, it's hard for people who wasn't around then. I was around then. You were around then. So we know how over the title was.
Oh.
I mean, the wrestler was over because he had the title. I mean, if you weren't known in an area coming in as the champion, the NWA champion, you were almost automatically over because the title was over.
People wanted who is this guy? You know?
Yeah.
I mean, it made you like, this guy must be good.
Right.
You
know? I mean, Thez and Mushnick did such a great job of holding up and putting that title over that it was over for 30, 40 years. I mean,
and of course it didn't happen, but I thought that was an honor.
Oh, yes, very much.
I don't know if Barnett didn't want that. You know, me being from Georgia and the connection I had with the promotions and the East Coast of Georgia, and my brother with the West Coast, he was married to Fred Ward's granddaughter. You know, Barnett was funny like that, you know.
And then your family was in Savannah.
Yeah, and the East Coast over there. So, but it didn't happen, but
yeah,
it could.
But I mean, the fact that I was a short list. I mean, of people, it always is. Of people that they would even think about or talk about.
You know, I mean, I was very excited, but I probably had no idea what was involved with that. I mean, you got to make your own book. I mean, your own flights. Mm-hmm. You know, that's on you.
Do you have a world title match that you remember as one that you'd never forget? I mean, I ask you, and you remember these with Terry, but was there another world title match that was probably the one that was in your mind the most, that you liked the most?
Picked out the most. Well, it was with two different champions. But the one that sticks out the most was my first world title with Jack Briscoe. I'm thinking. And he was in Florida when I started. And he wasn't a world champion then. Right. I started in 70. And I'm thinking, this guy here, I didn't think I'd ever wrestle somebody like him, two-time NCAA heavyweight wrestling champion, never defeated from Oklahoma State, and now he's the world champion. I was a nervous wreck, to be honest. And
how long had you been in the business then?
Up to 74, wasn't it? Wasn't Jack the champion in 74?
73 and 74 and 75. But the first time you wrestled him was probably 74, maybe.
It was 74 in St. Joe, Missouri.
Yeah.
Hour with him. And we get out there. Referee gives us instructions. And hook up and blah, blah, blah. He snatched a headlock on me. So I called a spot. He said, no. I never opened my mouth the rest of the hour. That's the only time.
I would imagine the guys that Jack didn't like working with was the guys that were lazy, like the guys that would just lay on the mat or whatever. And you weren't ever that way. I mean,
no.
you wanted to move, you wanted action. So he probably really enjoyed working with you.
He did. He did. And when it was over, we got together. He said, I told him, I said, I thank you for that, sir. He said, I enjoyed it. But I figured when he said no, he's the world champion, it's going to go the way he wants it to go.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But I worked with him again in Des Moines. And he was coming in from Portland. And so he was late getting there. So when he got there, Geiger said, I need an hour. He said, I can't do it. He said, I left Portland this morning at 9:30 getting here.
Wow.
Had to fly here, yonder, everywhere, layovers. He said, I got something better than that. Geiger said, well, let me have it. He said, we go rock and roll for about 25 or 30 minutes. He said, I'm going to do everything I can to you. You make a comeback. He said, you throw me from pillar to post. Then he said, we're going to be parallel by the ropes. He said, I want you to give me a standing suplex. Boom. You turn and cover me. The referee's in there. He said, you go 1, 2, 3. But he said, as you're coming down for 3, my foot's going to go in that bottom rope. And the referee said, what if your foot's not there? He said, that's on me.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, Jerry, I want you to, when you hear 3, you don't know my foot's in the rope, but the referee has hit 3. You jump up, go to the timekeeper's table, run around the ring with that belt over your head, running around, and the referee's going to tell me I didn't win. Your foot was in the rope. He said, I'm going to come in behind you, push you in, and roll you up. He said, but I want you to still be holding on to that title when the referee goes 1, 2, 3.
Oh, what a great finish.
Yeah, that's better than an hour.
What a great finish.
And I always respected him. You didn't mess with him. Nobody messed with him.
I bet every one of your matches with him drew after that.
Yeah, I always had good matches with him.
Because everybody thought you just one count away from winning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so I better go to the matches tonight. He could win it tonight because he was just one count away from winning it last time.
I was treated good by all the world champions I worked with. Did I tell you the story of me and Harley?
I don't think so.
I'm in Louisiana for Watts. And before I went out there, I didn't want to go. And they told me Watts wanted me to call him, and I said, I'm not going out there. But I already knew Bill from when he was here. And he took care of me. I should have gone, but there was some health issues in my mother-in-law, and I couldn't leave. And he knew that. He said, you stay as long as you need to stay. So anyhow, I go out there for him. He did everything he said he was going to do for me. So we're at TV in Shreveport. Harley's at TV. And I'm the North American champion, right? So referee came in there and said, Bill wants to see you down there in the men's bathroom. I said, okay. So I went down there. Harley's in there. And Bill said, you and Harley are going to wrestle on TV today. I'm like, uh-oh. So Bill said, this is what he wants. Talking about Harley. Mm-hmm. He said, you're going to have your match. Boom, boom, boom. Harley's going to pick you up and slam you. You do something till you boom, then slam you. He's going up to the top rope. He's going to come off and cross body block you. You're going to hook him, and you're going to roll over on top of him. 1, 2, 3. I'm going. Harley said, you know why I'm doing this? He said, I'm coming back in two weeks, and you and I are working everywhere.
So it's a non-title match on TV?
Yes, called business.
Yeah.
Now, how many guys would do that?
Yeah. Well, when you're the world champion, you constantly got to be thinking about the return.
He thought of me to do that. He didn't have to. He could have come 100 other things, DQ, whatever.
And I get heat for this sometimes from the Thez fans. But that's the one little thing that bothered me about Lou as the champion was he didn't always make the other guy look great. Like, especially if he didn't respect him.
You know, I heard that. I heard that from an old timer. Where was he? In Kansas City or Georgia? That worked with him. He said when he left, you meant nothing. That's what he told me.
Yeah. And that was part of the responsibility, especially after Lou passed on the title. Part of the responsibility of the champion was you got to make your opponent look like they could have beaten you.
Exactly. Because
you got to work, you're going to have returns.
Exactly. But, you know, I respected Lou Thez. I was tag partners with him one time. I wrestled him one time. I was horrified on Atlanta TV. I'm young as I don't know what. They said when he goes for that double wrist lock, you better be ready to go. I mean, he didn't play in there.
Right.
I mean, he smacked you around and all, but I mean, he was who he was, you know.
And I was just thinking about this with the Briscoe match. I mean, when you were the champion, Muchnick drilled it into your head. You cannot let somebody take it from you. Like you got to watch out for the double cross, you know.
Right.
And so he doesn't know that when you wrestled Briscoe, that was the first time you ever met him, right? And so you got in the ring with him, y'all hooked up, and you called the spot?
I met him in Florida.
Oh, you met him in Florida?
It was just, you know, first, second match, you know.
Yeah, but you'd never worked with him before.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking when you called the spot, he probably thought, I better wrestle with this guy for a little while before I let him start talking, you know.
I know anytime I would work with Harley, he'd say, give me anything you want. Call it anything you want. Because, you know, I know he gave me a spot one night in New Orleans. We're going through. We come up, and he said, take me over. He said, I forgot it. Give it back to me. He said, I've gone to the next one. You know, we're awesome. All human, you know.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed working with Harley, Jack, Terry. I wrestled Flair one time when he was a champion. I wasn't impressed with that.
So one question I was just thinking about when you're talking about when you wrestled Terry or Jack or Harley, and then you wrestled them 3 or 4 times. So, like, do you remember, was the finish in Kansas City different than the one in Des Moines, or did you guys do the same finish?
I think we did something a little different.
Because that's the thing that always amazed me was the champion always had to come out of it pretty clean, but they also had to make their competitor look like they were going to win or could have beaten them. But the finishes had to be different, you know, to do that. And the Dory Jr. and Jack were the ones that amazed me the most. They wrestled over 200 and something times, and so many of the matches had different finishes. And I mean, that's being creative.
There's one match I've got it saved on my phone where they were in Japan, and it's highlights of their match. There were moves in there I've never seen before. I've never seen. But to me, that's where Jack really learned to work, was working with him.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, you get on the mat, that's a horse with a different color.
Well, you know, people have criticized Dory Jr. over the years because he didn't lose to Jack and he lost to Harley because of the truck thing, the pickup truck accident. But really, the fact that Jack never beat Dory Jr. was a great draw for their second with Jack as the champion.
Exactly.
It turned out to be great for business, you know.
But I think that's where Jack really learned to work, working with him.
Yeah. Well, man, I've taken up plenty of your time, and I really appreciate you joining me. What's your favorite just thing that you remember, either going to matches as a fan or working or whatever? What was your favorite NWA World Title thing?
Match.
Anything. I mean, could have been an interview, could have been a match, could have been, you know, who'd you see in Columbus when you were just going to the matches?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, you saw, I guess, Thez, you saw Kaninsky.
Yeah, Freddie Blassie.
But as the world champion.
Oh, as the world champion. Kaninsky was the first one I remember.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of Gene?
I was too young to really know.
Mm.
Yeah, and I don't know what kind of champion he was.
But there again, you just knew he was the champion.
Right. But, you know, I just love what I did.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it.
You still do?
I still do.
That's why I love talking with you on these shows, because I can just tell you love it. I love it. We all love it. We just have a ball talking about it, you know. And
I never complained about the trips when I was in these long territories. I knew that was part of it. That's what I chose to do. Nobody made me do that. That's what I chose to do. I wanted to do something different than everybody else I went to school with. I knew I wanted to travel. I knew God had blessed me with athletic ability, and that was what I chose to do. And it was the right choice for me.
Yeah.
Now, some guys got in this business and they say, nah, this ain't for me. You know, somewhere different every night, or that's just the way it was. But that was what I chose to do. But there were so many things, it'd be hard to say what was my favorite. Of course, having world title matches with these great guys, being honored to be able to do that. But there's nothing I didn't like about it.
Certainly isn't a very long list of people who got to do it. So good for you.
And you know, it's that's what they say about the NFL. It's not for long. But my career, I look at it, it went by just like that.
Yeah.
And I look back and where did it go? And it's something that I miss every day.
Well, what's going to be great about it is we're going to go into here pretty soon. We're going to be on here. We're going to go into 76 and talk about that. So I can't wait to spend time with you next year and talk about 76. And you're going to be leaving Kansas City. And where are you going in 76?
Where did I go in 76?
Did you go to Portland or did you go to Texas or where'd you go?
No. 76, we left Kansas City and came back here.
Oh, okay. Good.
And I left here in the end of 76 and went to Louisiana in 77.
All right. Well, I haven't even looked yet, but I'm excited about it. I'm excited to talk about your career in 76.
Well, it's an honor for me to ask me to be on your shows. I love it.
Thank you, man.
I
appreciate it. I love you, and you give my best and happy holidays and Merry Christmas to your wonderful lady there, and y'all have a great holiday season.
You too, Tony.
Wow, how fortunate are we to be able to talk to Jerry about being the first guy that Terry Funk wrestled after he won the NWA title. Terry wrapped up the night in Miami, and he took some photos with our good friend Don DeLeon, who was on our show last week. And then he did some television interviews with Gordon Soley, setting up a return match with Jack Briscoe in Tampa. And then he jumped on a plane immediately and started the NWA World Title schedule. And that flight went to Kansas City, Missouri, and Memorial Hall. And Jerry Oates thought he was wrestling Jack Briscoe that night, right up until the time somebody came in the dressing room and said Terry Funk was there. What a great story. I'm having a blast today. Merry Christmas to you and all of yours. I hope you're having a good Merry Christmas and happy holiday time with us here today at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. And we're going to roll on to our fourth guest and our main event. A good friend, Jerry Briscoe, is here to talk about his brother Jack and his run as the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, culminating in that night in Miami where Jack was so ready to get rid of that title and give it to Terry Funk down at the Convention Center on December 10th of 75. Let's get some of Jerry Briscoe's thoughts about Jack being the champion, about Jack as a person, about Jack getting the title and all the circumstances around that. I think you're really going to enjoy this wonderful conversation here at the Richards Ranch with my good friend Jerry Briscoe. Let's go to that right now. Well, here on the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel's Christmas Super Show, I am excited to welcome my dear close friend, Mr. Jerry Briscoe. Jerry, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, man. We're not talking about the Welches today.
Well, we're doing this
another powerful family, right?
We're doing this big old series over on the Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw show on the Roy Welch family and his legacy, and we're not talking about that today. We're going to talk about something different, but something close and near and dear to your heart for sure.
Yeah, my brother Jack, man. He was known in the wrestling circle as Brother Jack because everybody got along with Jack. Jack got along with everybody, respected my brother. He was a hell of a leader in the locker room, and even bigger leader in that ring there. So yeah, I'm proud to call him my brother, my big brother.
That's fantastic. Now, when did he first start thinking about or having the idea that he might become the NWA champion?
NWA champion or just in pro wrestling?
Well, he broke in 65 with Leroy McGurk's Tulsa territory, right?
That's correct. And, I kind of chuckle nowadays. They send these kids to all these advanced training centers and all that where they got all the bells and whistles on them. They're fantastic, man. You think back, man, I kind of wish, you'd had the opportunity, but things were different back then. Jack won a national championship, I believe it was in March or April of 65. And then May of the same year, 65, he had his first TV match, first match ever and it was on TV against the great Ronnie Garvin. And what a rivalry they would end up having. And great story there. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Ronnie threw an elbow and busted Jack's eye open, his very first match. Jack was so proud of that eye, he couldn't wait to get back to Stillwater and the university to show all of his friends and his teammates, look, wrestling's real. I've got busted open.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, that was a big deal. But Ronnie, back in those days, even the TV, the wrestlers were in separate parts of the station, so they couldn't communicate. So Ronnie was leaving the territory that night, so he got in his car and took off to wherever he was going. Never had a chance to tell Jack he was sorry, or that it was an accident and all that. But Jack knew it was an accident,
Yeah, sure. And then he worked with so Garvin left the territory, but they put him with Tretch Phillips right away.
Right away. What a great guy. We've talked about Tretch, of course, in our Welch series. One of those awesome Tennessee guys that Roy and Herb broke in the Tennessee area, and along with Sputnik Monroe and all those guys. All those Tennessee guys, they come along and they were feared. I mean, you knew they were something special. You knew they could hold their own against anybody you put them in the ring with. So, yeah, Jack had a lot of experience with Roddy Etchison, another old tough Tennessee dude that come along that don't get much airtime, but he's a guy that ought to dig into and see a little bit about him, because he was one of those really tough guys that come along every once in a while. But
And Leroy was, of course, a world junior champion for the NWA, and he really liked pushing the junior heavyweights. And I don't know if you know or not, but he put what they were calling the Missouri junior title onto Jack there for a little while. So I think he knew Jack was going to have a lot of potential as far as the alliance was concerned. But in '69, he went to Florida. And Eddie saw something in him and really started pushing him, right?
Yeah, you know how he got to Florida, right? And it's an interesting story. He was working for Fritz, and Fritz, of course, at that old Oklahoma, Texas thing, Fritz wasn't really treating Jack good. Jack was not a rookie, but probably in his second year of the business, and so he wasn't getting much traction going there because of Fritz had so many other guys he pushed him. Jack was getting frustrated. Jack was wanting to teach and coach and all that stuff. He'd already had one setback when he went to Tennessee, and a boulder fell off the top of a mountain and rode down on his car and totaled his car out, and he didn't have funds to drive around or anything like that. And ended up, I think it was Sputnik Monroe giving him $35. He bought a bus ticket and went back to Oklahoma. Was going to finish school up and start teaching and coaching, but Leroy talked him out of, thank goodness, and kept him on the path. But he was in Dallas working, and he befriended a guy by the name who would change his name and become a heck of a lot more popular, Joe Scarpa, and Texas. And Jack said, Scarpa said, you ought to go to Florida. I know the promoter down there. If you want, I'll give him a contact. I've never been to Florida. I always wanted to go to Florida. And on a lark, Jack packed his bags, and Joe made the call to Eddie and got Jack booked down there. And immediately Eddie fell in love with Jack. And Eddie was in one of those stages. Eddie really was ahead of the curve on a lot of stuff there. Eddie came into Florida, and it was blood, guts, and he saw that during the early 60s and mid 60s, he saw society kind of changing, and what they were changing to. And so Eddie changed his style and went into scientific, what we call scientific, or what's scientific wrestling, that's a term that's not used, but that was like a babyface, good guy type characters. So Eddie built his territory around Jack, and then when Jack got champion, Eddie decided he wanted to go back to the blood and guts, and he brought Dusty up. So Eddie was always changing his product, but we're talking about Jack. So during Jack's course at the time, Eddie decided he wanted to go that scientific route, and he chose Jack as his soldier to lead the way.
And at that time, did Eddie start thinking that he was going to champion the push for Jack to get the title at that time?
I don't think, Tony, in the beginning, Eddie really knew Jack had that much drawing power about him, because he was still really young in the business, just a couple of years, 2 or 3 years in the business. And so I think as time went on and he saw Jack's reaction, saw the different type of crowd that Jack was drawing in. He was drawing a younger audience into it, because Jack, coming out of college, he had the long hair and a mod dress and all that stuff, the flare pants, all that. he was part of society's growth at the time and part of what society was turning into. And as Jack started gaining ground, guys like Don Curtis, John Heath, some of Eddie's main brain trust guys started, hey, you take a deep look at Jack. Jack can go. Let's put the Florida title on him. Mm-hmm. And Eddie, out of the confidence of those other guys, put the title on Jack, and Jack just started selling out everywhere he went, and then started getting requests. Eddie started shipping him out to Carolinas, to Georgia. And they saw how he was drawing there, and that kind of put the light switch on Eddie's head and said, Jack could be a good world champion. So he started politicking for Jack to become world champion.
And that whole Funk and Briscoe feud started there too in Florida, where Dory Jr. was the champion, and Old Man Funk was doing the interviews, and then Terry was getting involved as kind of the policeman, and then you were kind of the counter guy on Jack's side. And then that whole Funk and Briscoe feud started drawing in Florida, and then Jim Crockett wanted it, and then other people wanted it, and then I think that helped boost other people too when they saw that and wanted that Briscoe Funk thing to just keep going.
Yeah, you're right, Tony. Exactly right. And Jack's book, Bill Murdoch wrote a wonderful book called Briscoe: The Makings of a World Champion. But he asked Jack, "What was your biggest moment in your career?" And you know what Jack said? You've read the book.
I've read the book, yeah.
And Jack said, "The night Dory Funk won the world title." Because Jack knew then that Dory Funk Jr. was opening the door for guys like Jack, who was young, athletic, and not 6'6", not 6 foot, weighed 320 pounds, but an athletic guy. Because Dory was, in his prime, Dory was a hell of an athlete, a college football player, amateur both. But Jack claimed that was the deal. But that Funk Briscoe deal, we were fortunate. We had 4 great. Terry and I used to rib each other about that all the time. We had 4 great athletes that had no ego in the ring. All we wanted was a good match out of each other, and we knew that we didn't have to push each other to get it. We knew that competitive nature, and what a better setup, natural gimmick that they call it in our business. You had 4 athletes. You had 2 from Texas, 2 from Oklahoma, natural brothers. Both of them were both teams were natural brothers. Yeah. You had the Cowboy versus the Indian, Oklahoma versus Texas. So we had all the ingredients to a great rivalry, and really didn't even realize what we were getting into with those.
Yeah, I think from 1970 to 1976, there was a Funk or Briscoe on the annual Thanksgiving card in Charlotte. Crockett's really took advantage of that, even when you guys weren't regulars in the territory.
That's true. I even bring Jack up, and that was a blessing too. That Jack and I, we kind of saw the business as a business when we were getting into it. Jack would always, Gerald, this is not real. It's a business. So we got to do things that we wouldn't normally do. We got to work with guys and let guys beat us that really couldn't be in the same ring with us if we wanted not to be,
Right.
And so we realized it was a business right away. So it kind of set us up for that, for the whole funk deal. But we realized it was a business. So so Jack said we if we want to make it in this business, we can't be tag teams in the beginning. You got to go your way, and I got to go my way. And at first, I'm a little brother. I don't want to lose my brother as my partner,
Sure.
So he chose Florida, and I got fortunate enough. I ran into Rip Hawk in Australia and worked with Rip for about 3 months down there. And Rip got me booked in Charlotte, and Jim Crockett Sr. saw me and saw the ability I had, and was wise enough to know, hey, his brother's just right down and short plane ride to Florida, so I can bring him up here anytime I want to, and they can go to Florida anytime I want to. So that Jim Crockett Sr. is really the one that kind of started that, bringing Jack in, came me and Eddie, saw the success. He'd bring me in, and I'd team with Jack there. So yeah, through the years, Greensboro was a Briscoe staple for main events.
You bet. And that whole NWA World Title changed with Dory Funk Jr. also because Jim Barnett's Australia came in as a member, and then you had the Japan guys too. So it really became a world championship because that schedule really got hairy, starting with Junior. And then, of course, when Jack got it in 73, he then started on that same schedule. And how long did it take him to just kind of get tired of it?
Right away. I mean, Jack, you're used to working a Florida territory, or Georgia territory, where you're home basically every night that you want to be home, and the trips are short and pleasant and everything. You're not beating down that airport. You're not running up and down that Concord trying to catch a plane and all that stuff. So Jack was really Jack. I think if he could have had that world title and just stayed in Florida, and Georgia, and the Carolinas, and every once in a while venture, I think he would have kept it a lot longer than he wanted to keep it. But the traveling part of him, and the family life, he'd gone through one nasty divorce already, and didn't want to go through another one and everything. And it about a year into Jack, I could look at Jack's face, and I could, I've known him, of course, all of his life. I could see the road miles was starting to get to him. His temperament, it wasn't easy going, easy Jack, as they called him. It wasn't easy Jack anymore. He always had that edge to him where, he's on guard against something. So it started to get to him fairly early, and he just kept sticking it up. He actually was, the year he decided to drop, they're getting ready to have their big convention out there. And so he did a no for the NWA champion. They'd always gone out there. Jack had made the first couple, as champion. And then he said, I go out there and all I do is shake hands and smile and all that stuff. I don't get up, I don't talk, and nobody, all this stuff. So I'm not going this year. So he calls me and said, Gerald, I'm going out to the lake. He just bought himself a little 30-foot boat, lake boat for the Lake Lanier out in Georgia. I'm gonna put my boat in the water. There's no telephones. This, of course, pre-cell phone days. There's no phones out there. He says, if anybody calls me, just tell them I went to the Bahamas or I went to Puerto Rico or something like that. Don't tell them I'm out to the lake, or they'll send somebody out to church me down. So Jack didn't go to the NWA convention. He told Barnett that he wasn't going to go. He called Eddie and told Eddie that he wasn't going to go. Both of them talked to him, and during that week, I must got 15 calls, even though they knew, where's your brother? Where's your brother? They knew where Jack. They didn't know exactly where he was at, but they knew he wasn't coming. I said, what did he? Because I asked Jack, did Eddie and Jim know? Yeah, I told them both, and they're both pissed off. So please don't tell them where I'm at. So of course, being the brother, I didn't stooge him off.
Yeah, sure.
But that's kind of when he decided, I don't want this thing anymore. He had bought stock in both Georgia and Florida, was making money. We had a real estate company who was making money. Of course, we had Briscoe Brothers Body Shop that he was making some money on. So it wasn't a financial thing. And Jack was a very frugal guy and saved his money very, very, very tightly, very close. So he was financially, he was all set up, especially with the other business that he was involved in. So that's basically when he decided, when he didn't show up at the convention. He got all kinds of heat over that.
And he got a little side piece of money for dropping the title to Baba there in 74 too, right?
Yeah, he got a pretty good chunk of money there, and sneaking that money across the border. Back then, you could only bring 10. I think it's still the same. You only bring 10K across the border there, but they didn't have all the security checks, all the X-ray machines and everything. It's basically guys in there. You got cash on you. I got a couple $1,000 on it. Okay, go through. So it's sort of a deal like that. But yeah, he got him. I guess what he could probably, with inflation and everything, probably say close to $1 million current dollars.
Yeah, and the Funks were the bookers for Baba, so Did Terry set up that deal for Jack?
Well, Terry and Dory both did it, and they both tell the story exactly like I'm telling it. So I'm not exaggerating. People, oh, you exaggerate. That's impossible. They went, what benefit? But they got to realize Baba had competition over there, and Japan, more so than the U.S. or any other country. It's a prestige type deal over there. And they figured if Baba had that world championship, even if it's just for a week, if he won that world championship, that would separate him from all the competition it did. So they worked out, the Funks called Jack. It started out with Terry, and Jack had a week off. And of course, Terry being close to Sam, the Funks being close to Sam, they had Jack's schedule. All the promoters had Jack's schedule, so they knew he had that week off. So they called Jack, you got a week off. Would you go over to Japan and work a deal with Baba? And Jack said, Terry's my week off. And Terry wasn't champion, of course, at the time. He said, you know how your brother valued his time off. He said, I got to have this time off. I got to recharge. Well, how much would you want if you did want to go there? Jack said, Terry, I don't want to go over there. Terry said, well, just make a deal. Just put a figure out there. So Jack put this obnoxious figure out there. Figured Terry would, oh, no, we can never go for that. Terry said, I'll get back with you. Well, Terry shared the figure with Dory, and Dory called. Then Dory took over. Dory called Jack. So Jack, just name an outrageous price so I can give them a price anyway. If they turn it down, great. At least we tried. So Jack threw out $250,000 after thinking, no way in hell they're going to pay me that sum. This is what,
1974.
74. So $250,000. Oh, Jack, well, you told me to throw a figure out there. So he threw that $250,000 out there. So they go back and forth a couple of more days. And finally, one day, Terry and Junior called Jack. And Jack, you got it.
Wow.
I can't believe what you got it. So Jack said, okay, I'll go. But this is the conditions, And he laid out his conditions and everything.
Yeah. And it actually caused Inoki, who was Baba's competitor over there, he went out and made a deal with the National Wrestling Federation to get their world title, so he could say he had a world title too.
Yeah, well, that was just trying to copy, but nobody had the prestige that the prestige getting it from Jack Briscoe, who was an amateur champion, and you know how amateur wrestling is in Japan. It's revered and
oh sure,
so than it is there.
You know, Jack was. I always thought it was ironic that Sam retired at the same convention that Jack turned in his notice that he wanted to get the title off of himself. And let me ask you this. I mean, Sam, we've talked about before how what he wanted a champion to look like and wanted him to be like. And he finally got close with Dory Jr., but I think he got his perfect champion. If he could pick anybody to be the NWA champion, he got Jack, because Jack checked all the boxes. He used his real name. He had been a collegiate champion. He could wrestle and have great matches as the NWA champion on top. I mean, wasn't Jack sort of Sam's perfect view of what a champion should be?
Yeah, and Sam told Jack that several times, and Jack and Sam had a very tight business relationship and a lot of respect for each other. But Jack was that perfect guy that you wanted. Like you said, he was a collegiate champion. He was clean cut, a good looking young guy. A lot of people called him Handsome Jack. Yeah. Jack had that movie star look, and he had that long wavy curly hair of his, and so he was just a perfect athlete. He could go all day long, and he was not an ego type guy at all. He very, very modest guy up until the day he passed away. He was just so modest, that people outside the business. He could talk with the CEO of any corporation in the United States and be impressive. He could talk to a first grader. He could talk to a middle school. He just had that perfect ingredients of everything you're looking for in a champion. He changed a lot of opinions on how a champion should be.
Yeah, I've always heard, and I don't know, I want to ask you about this, but I've always heard that Vince McMahon Sr. Really liked Jack the way he looked as a champion, and that's one of the reasons he wanted Backlund. Is that true?
That's exactly right, Tony. He said, he'd had all these big ethnic type guys and everything, and he saw the success that Eddie was having with Jack, and Vince Senior had a home over in Fort Lauderdale area. Every time Vince Senior was down there, and Eddie knew about it, Eddie would invite him out to the matches if it was in Miami or Hollywood or Fort Lauderdale, wherever we were at in South Florida. He'd invite the McMahons out. So Vince Senior came out several times, saw Jack, met Jack, and saw the reaction he did. So he started thinking, this is where I want to build my territory on. I need a guy like a Jack Briscoe guy. And he went all over the place looking for that guy, and he ended up with finding Bobby Backlund. And Backlund will tell you that same exact story, that if it hadn't been for Jack, Backlund might not have ever got that opportunity in New York.
Yeah, I'd always heard that Eddie had suggested either Steve Kern or Bob Backlund. And Mushnick ended up putting the Missouri title on Backlund, which is usually the title you get before you get the NWA title. And McMahon liked what Backlund had drawn in St. Louis and how he had been in St. Louis, and so the rest is history. But
the rest is history. And you mentioned the name there also, Steve Kern. I mean, a lot of people don't give Steve Kern was one hell of a performer in his young days. When he first got into business, he was just a natural. Of course, he had been around Mike for years and years and years and knew a little bit about the business. But Steve's often overlooked, as just a gimmick star, but Steve could get the job done. Steve's name was mentioned several times.
Yeah, Eddie had mentioned you ought to take Steve because of his dad's, was a POW in 2 different wars, and had all the patriotic stuff and all that. But
perfect story.
but McMahon ended up going with Backlund.
Because Backlund was a little bit taller. That's the bottom line. That's how they got picked over.
And I've done a lot of research into the Funk family, as you know. After Dory Sr., Old Man Funk, passed away, it really, really, really played hard on Terry. He actually was having anxiety attacks. He thought he was having a heart attack, like Funk Sr. had, and really bothered him a lot. He was under a whole lot of stress. That's one of the reasons he went down to Florida to get out of West Texas. And he was having relationship issues with Vicky, and they were getting a divorce. And Terry was not doing all that great financially. He ended up selling his part of the Amarillo territory to Ricky Romero and Ray Stevens. And he had a breakdown in Pueblo, Colorado one night in the locker room. And he told Junior, Don the Lawman Slatton's doing better financially than I am, and I want to do better. And so Junior decided he was going to try to go to the convention, and it really goes back to the '68 convention, because at the '68 convention they had a family meeting, and Senior told both of them, I think I can get the world title for one of you. And Terry, you've got the interview and you've got the champion look, and Dory, you got the work of the world champion. You can work in the match. And Terry said, well, I think we ought to go with Junior. And so he stepped back so Junior get the title, and so Senior got that done. But then so Junior felt like he owed Terry something for that, right? And so he wanted to get the title for him. He went to the championship committee meeting. They had it at the airport in Dallas because Fritz had taken over for Sam Muchnick. And it was heavy for Harley. And Harley had been the in-between guy in '73 to get the title from Funk Jr. to Jack. And they had promised him that he would get another run later on. And so he got the book in Georgia for Barnett, and then he got the book in Florida for Eddie. And then at the end of '75, he moved on back to Kansas City thinking he was going to be the champion. Matter of fact, Barnett filled out the schedule for Harley to be back in Kansas City. That's why Terry had to fly to Kansas City the next day after he won the title in Miami. But Junior got the vote kind of swayed. Mike LaBelle voted for Terry. Jim Crockett Sr. or Junior, Jim Crockett Jr. changed his vote to Terry. And so they had a tie, and they had Fritz as the president had to break the tie, and Fritz went for Terry. Did Jack have an opinion about who should get it after him?
Jack's handpicked successor, honestly, and I think what really carried the boat was Terry Funk. And that, and everybody, well, why would he pick Terry after what the Funks did to the Briscoe? But that was just something that was so political that Jack never forgot it, but yet he also was involved in the business as a promoter so much, with Georgia and Florida, that he realized Terry was the way to go, because Terry could switch back and forth from babyface to heel, and I think that's really where all the promoters were kind of looking. This guy is versatile. We can bring him in here and book him against our top heel, or book him against our top babyface. I think that's really a sway to do. But Terry was Jack's handpicked guy. That's who Jack wanted to drop it to.
And he did let the other guys know that's who he would pick if it were up to him, that he would drop it to Terry.
That's true, yes. He let everybody know he'd drop it to Terry with no issue at all.
So after Miami, he had a rematch with Terry the next week in Tampa. Terry had to fly to St. Louis. I talked to Jerry Oates. He had the next match with Terry the next night in Kansas City. Then they had another match Saturday night in Des Moines. Then Terry had to fly back to Florida. By the way, there were some weeks in 1975 where Jack would wrestle Dory Funk Jr. in El Paso and then fly to Tampa on Tuesday and have a match on Tuesday. Both of them would have a match there on Tuesday. Then they'd go back to Lubbock on Wednesday, back to West. I mean, it was brutal there for a while in 75.
Speaking of that schedule, I mean, and they did this. It was the same way with tag teams too. We would work here one night and be back in Texas the next night, be in Georgia or Kansas City the next night. But I remember I picked Jack up in the airport in Richmond, Virginia. He worked an hour draw, I think, that night with Johnny Weaver. That night I had to drive him to Washington, D.C., so he could get on a plane and fly to Tokyo, Japan. Wow. He flew to Tokyo. He worked an hour match, I think, with Inoki. The next night I picked him up in the airport in St. Louis, and he did an hour Broadway that night with Hardy Race. Now imagine that. 3 straight hours, you're going from Richmond to Tokyo, from Tokyo back to St. Louis. And after St. Louis, I can't remember where he went after that, but it's probably another hour draw somewhere else.
But he wrestled another 9 years after he dropped the title that night in Miami. The Dory Funk Jr. was the advertisement for the match. It was a Jack Dory Jr. match that was advertised, and then the announcer comes out, and we had the photographer on last week who took the photos backstage, and he said he'd never seen Terry Funk so happy as he was when he came through the door with the title. And I've seen
a life-changing night. I mean, financially and career-wise.
And I've seen you comment before that Jack did the interview where he was all down about it and frustrated and all with Gordon, but he was really happy too. Really, in real life, he was super happy to get the title off of himself. Is that right?
Guys were saying that night they didn't know who were happier, Jack Briscoe or Terry Funk. Jack dropped it. Jack was ready to party. I mean, he was happy. He was a happy camper, That weight of that title and all that airport running back and forth was lifted off to him. People got to realize airports and flying, in that time wasn't as simple as it is nowadays. I mean, there's one flight somewhere, and you better be on that flight, or you're out of luck till the next day.
And that might be at midnight after you'd wrestled, right?
It's just the pressure of catching those flights every day, and there was every day. I mean, I read some of these stupid remarks on social media. Well, NWA was a local champion. BS. And it was probably the local champion was up north. I mean, they didn't get out of the Northeast,
Right. I can't remember if I read it in his book or if I just heard it, but that after he dropped the title, he took his watch off and said, I don't have to, watch this, look at this watch.
The damn lake, right about 2 miles from where I live. Jack had a house over there on a lake there. That way he lost it. He had a big party. He burned all of his tights. He burned his boots, and he took his watch off, and he said, "I'll never wear another watch the rest of my life." Took that watch off and threw it in the damn lake, and never bought him another watch for the rest of his life.
He retired in '84 after you guys went up north for a while at the WWF. But those 9 years, from the time he lost the title in Miami that night until he retired from the WWF, what were those 9 years like for him? Did he enjoy just his part in the wrestling business then?
He enjoyed it for the most part, Tony. But towards the end, I mean, when we were making that, he did not want to work anymore. After we'd already said, Carolinas is our last go round, and they extended that. They kept it because we were just doing such great business with Steamboat and Youngblood,
right?
And both Ricky and Jay and Jim Jr. were, Jack, please just stay another one. We got this big show, please just stay. So they talked it out. That's when they started talking about how big Starrcade was going to be, because we were supposed to be gone 6 months before that. And Jim Jr. promised Jack all this paydays and all this stuff he would stay on. So Jack decided he would stay on till then. So that Starrcade was supposed to be our last go around. We had a few remaining shots left as a tag team left in Georgia that we wanted to fulfill, because we're owners there and we didn't want no show. We'd be the ones that no show in our own territory.
Right.
So we filled those in. So that's when we worked the deal with Vince, and we were off probably 6 months, and then I was enjoying it. I was remodeling my house. I was doing a body shop, and the body shop was just growing like hell. I think we went from like 13 people employed up to like 30 employees during that time frame, because we're growing so big and so fast. So Jack was enjoying that businessman style of life, and Vince Jr. called me one day at the shop, said, "Hey, we just had to let a couple of teams go. We really need you guys. Would you come on?" And I don't know. I got to talk to Jack. So I hung up from Vince, and about 5 minutes later, George Scott called. He said, "I don't know if you realize what's going on, but you guys can make some serious money if you come up here." So I went out and I talked to Jack. Jack did not want to. It wasn't New York. He just didn't want to work anymore. It could have been Florida.
Yeah.
He just didn't want to work it. He didn't want to put those boots on anymore.
But the weather didn't help any.
And the weather didn't help any. So he said, "As a favor for you, I'll do it for a short period of time. It's just we're filling in for somebody when they get the right circumstances going back. I'm quitting. You can do whatever you want to do." I said, "Okay, I'll call George." So I called George from George and Vet from Jack's house, and we agreed to come up there and just get for a short period of time. Hell, it ended up almost 11 months we stayed up there, because the deal with Murdoch and Adonis was going so well. George Scott came to us towards the end of the run. He said, "Listen," he said, "I'd like to kind of repeat what you guys did in Carolina with Ricky and Jay, only with Mike Rotundo and Barry Windham."
Mm-hmm.
And Jack, I don't know. I don't think so. And I was all for it, of course, because I saw some more dollars coming.
Sure.
And I was so young enough in the business. So Jack said, "I don't know." So we got the flight home from wherever it was, and Jack said, "Man, Gerald, I'm too old." And he's 41 years old. I'm too old, But Jack was prideful. He's one of those guys that, the great athletes. When you lose a step, you lost that step. And you don't have that same tone and everything in your body. And Jack realized that, and just realized it was time for him to hang it up. He said, I'm burnt. I'm ready to go home. I can't handle it. I can't go through work. Look at those two. They're both of them 275 pounds, and they're young. I can't keep up with those guys. So he decided it was time to take a powder, and he did.
Yeah, I remember thinking at the time, I was hoping that was going to be what would happen, is that you guys would get booked back, because you just looked like you had so much fun being heels.
It was, Tony. It was for me. It was the most enjoyable feud I ever had. But too, you think back, it wasn't that first time he healed. It was full time, but with the Funks in Florida, we were the baby faces, of course. we'd fly out to Texas, do the same match, use the same TV match, and everything else was just different commentators voicing a little bit different. And we were the heels out there because we're from Oklahoma, you know. So we'd worked heel for several years against the Funks on a limited basis, you know.
Well, last question for you, but did Jack ever comment or say anything about what he thought that 14-month run? What did he think about Terry as the champion?
He loved Terry Funk. I mean, he thought Terry did a great job, and Jack was a big fan. He was a big Harley fan and a big Terry fan, and I mean, he was behind both of them. He would have given the shirt off his back to Harley or Terry either one. He loved Terry because, you know, just when Jack was working a program with Junior, I mean, Senior would always, now, Jack, you and Terry stay away from each other. Well, hell, of course, they couldn't stay away from each other. You know, they were buddies. They totaled out 3 cars in one day, and Terry was afraid to go tell his old man who he'd driving with because they would break a kayfabe.
Yeah,
figured he might get fired by his own old man. He knew he couldn't fire Jack because Jack was champion.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Briscoe. Well, I appreciate you spending some time with me today to talk about Brother Jack, and his title run was spectacular. Those 2.5 years he had the belt. I mean, it was amazing.
You're the best in the world when you hold that title there. Yeah. And I ain't no doubt. Tony, thank you so much. And once again, let's plug stories. Briscoe and Bradshaw. We're getting such great positive feedback on our series about the Welches. Ron Fuller Welch has just gone out of his way to be helpful on this project that we're doing here. It's educating a lot of people on the history of our business. We appreciate you and your thorough research. People tell me, man, that Tony, what research that guy does, man. I hope when I grow up I can be just like you on the research.
Oh my gosh! Well, thank you so much, and it's really a lot of fun to dive into the most influential and largest family that's ever been in the pro wrestling business. And Ron's been so happy about it, and Jimmy Golden has been so happy about it, and a lot of other family members I've talked to, they've been really, really happy about it to see their family get recognized. So, and I appreciate you guys.
You see you on Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw.
That sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Briscoe. Well, wow. What a great conversation with my buddy Jerry Briscoe about Jack Briscoe and his NWA world title run from 73 to 1975. Well, that's our Merry Christmas Super Show here at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. It was as my friend of mine used to say, it was a big old good'un or it was a good old biggin'. I don't know which it was, but it was good and it was big and it was fantastic and it was a super show. And I hope you enjoyed all the wonderful guests we had today and all the work and investment from everyone here at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. Our fantastic producer, Dominic D'Angelo, who puts our show together every single week, who does the clips on our show, and it just does a fantastic job. Our graphic artist, Jake Hamer, who does our graphics for the Time Tunnel that you see on all our logos for the Daily Chronicle and for the Evolution of Wrestling and for the announcer series I'm doing. All those great graphics are done by Jake, and he is a wonderful person. He's been with me on the Time Tunnel since day one, and all our great guests that are on the show with me all the time. And we've had some fantastic guests this year in 2025. We have our special guests that we've had, and we have our regular cast who shows up. Howard Baum comes, and Tim Deals, and all the great historians that join in. And today's guests were fantastic. I will say one more time, Steve Gennerelli, George Schire, Jerry Oates, and Jerry Briscoe all took time to spend with me and here on the Time Tunnel for you this Christmas, and I hope you've enjoyed it. All right, well, that's what we got for you today. I'm most blessed of all to be here in Western Kentucky and to get to spend Christmas this year, several days since I live here now. I missed so many Christmases in my life, traveling due to snow and weather, a lot like the guys who were in the wrestling business who missed a lot of holidays with their family because they had to work and they had to travel. I did that for a long time as well. I usually got home. I've never missed a Thanksgiving here. My whole 62 years, I'll be 63 next year. I've never missed a Thanksgiving here at the Richards Ranch, but I missed a whole bunch of Christmases. And it's nice to be back here during the Christmas season and get spend time with my wonderful family. That's the biggest blessing of all, and all my friends who I get to talk to on a regular basis and share stories with, and that are all part of bringing you every feature that we have here at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. And I just want to wish you, from our house here at the Richards Ranch to your house where you are, Merry Christmas, everyone, and have a wonderful, happy holiday season. I'll see you back here next week on the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast History Show. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast. Tune in for another great episode next week, interviewing wrestlers, referees, and media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great. We'll release a new episode soon. Don't you dare miss it.